Oh, yep, sorry, Ted, I'll make you a
That's
co-host
right.
right now.
Tell me when we're ready.
All right.
There we go. All right. So it looks like we are live. People are still coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started with our continuation of our previous meeting. It's for November 19th. And this is, let's see, it's continuation of the Design Review Board Tree Board meeting. And let's see, some consistent with Executive Order N2920, in-person participation by the public will not be permitted and no physical location from which the public may observe the meeting will be available. Remote public participation is allowed using the Zoom program. In order to minimize the spread of COVID-19, the city is providing multiple alternatives for viewing public meetings and providing comments on items on the agenda. These alternatives allow the city to adhere to social distancing requirements, follow the governor's executive order, and provide a way for the public to provide public comment during the meeting. So, without further ado, let's come to order. And Alan, would you like to do a roll call, please?
Yeah, so Chair Luthen,
Present.
Vice Chair Langberg,
Here.
Carrie Bush,
Here.
Ron Harry, Ron, I see his screen.
Here he is.
I'm here.
Okay, and Christine Lovell. Christine, sorry.
She's here but muted as well.
Yeah, Christine, I just hit the unmute button for you. There you
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm here.
go. Okay, and then Gregory Beal had requested to be excused.
Sounds good. All right, we've got a little bit of business to take care of here before we get into our main attraction. Approval of minutes from our last meeting. Everybody have a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting? Were there any comments or corrections? All right, seeing and hearing no comments, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Sure, I'll make the motion.
All right, we have a motion. How about a second?
I'll second. Well, all three of us, I'll second.
There we go. We have a motion in 3 seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All of in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Hi.
Minutes are approved. All right. Do we have any, let's see, Planning Department update on matters of general interest?
I don't have any updates from yesterday.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any comments from the public regarding items that are not on our agenda? Not seeing any raised hands. I think everybody's here probably for our agenda item. So
I
we
do not see any raised hands, and I don't think we've received anything via email either.
no written comments. Okay. Then we will statements of conflict of interest. Do we have any conflicts of interest? I assume that if we did, we would not be here today, but all right, seeing none, we will move on to our regular agenda item. So this item is an item that was continued from our previous meeting on, and the continuance was based on a desire to see staking out in the field, and the applicant has provided staking for both the retaining walls and the property lines as requested. The other item we were hoping to get resolved was to get the city's arborist on board. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened. City is still trying to get the arborist on board, and the goal is to have the arborist ready for the formal application. We also received some additional community input. We received a number of comments. In fact, some additional comments came in today that I think we've all had and been able to review. So rest assured, all public comment has been distributed and reviewed. And just a reminder that what we are doing today is the continuation of a preliminary review. So this is not a formal application. We are not approving or denying anything. Our goal is to give hopefully specific and directed guidance to the applicant, things that are based in design and according to our design review guidelines. So that's what we're here to do today. So let's move right into it. A number of people spoke at our last meeting, and what we thought we'd do today is if you did not have a chance to speak at our last meeting and you would like to speak today, we are going to reopen the public hearing. We're going to have a 2-minute time limit and allow additional public comment for anybody, again, that did not speak at the last meeting. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand using the hand raise feature or wave at Alan and Carrie, and we will get you on board for public comment.
And most of the faces are familiar. I believe we had a lot of speakers at the last meeting.
Yeah.
I am not seeing any additional new folks comments.
Okay.
Matthew
Maybe
Al, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Matthew Long, and I live at 7717 Bodega Avenue, directly across from the proposed housing area. And I think we'd just like to express our concern about the significant addition of, I'm sure you've heard it already, of traffic. I mean, literally 2 weeks ago, we had someone run into our wall on our street because there is already so much traffic on Bodega, with very little control of it and speed and all that. So we're extremely concerned about that, and also the fact that we all frankly walk our dogs and walk their very little sidewalks on the routes that would be accessing this new housing development. Folks already cut through Leland and Robinson and at great speeds and without sidewalks, and that is clearly going to be the route that people will take to access this new development. And I think we are all concerned in this neighborhood about that level of traffic, adding up to 500 probably new trips coming from that area a day onto this area. So I of course sympathize with finding new housing opportunities for people, but we have pretty grave concerns about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any additional people wanting to speak?
I would like to speak.
All right.
I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing. This is the first time I've ever done this.
Is this Chuck? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. I live on Washington, right across from the school, the elementary school. And when the first time that you had a meeting, when it was live at the library, I commented about the traffic on Bodega and how horrific it is, but everybody knows that. What I really want to drive home is what it's like walking around this neighborhood now. We have a huge volume of cars cutting across from Bodega to 116 and vice versa. And because the alternative is to go down straight on Bodega to get to the 12 and into town. And nobody wants to do that. It's often backed up for blocks. It's backed up from Maine all the way up to Pleasant Hill sometimes. Very difficult to turn on the road. The plans to have people turn only right is obscene. But more than that, it's going to increase the amount of traffic going through the neighborhood. And I think it's already impossible. One more point. It just seems to me that while I certainly support finding more housing in the community, that this part of town has paid its part. I mean, we have more apartments and more smaller facilities, I don't even know what to call it, apartments, right at Bodega and Pleasant Hill down to Washington than anywhere else in town. It's extremely crowded and extremely dangerous. People fly down Washington, making that cut across, and up Washington. and the other streets as well. And I'm very concerned about it. The other thing is, having this as a preliminary thing is it's like we're waiting for the approval to come. So we're in a stage where something's being held over our heads and ain't nothing we can do about it. It feels real powerless given the level of threat that's involved to our community. Okay, I guess that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Looks like we have a few more raised hands.
Yeah, a couple more. Let's go to Chris and then Tamakiki Bro. Chris Inman.
I'm here. I don't know if I have video. In my, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. In my emails to Alan, I wanted to find out how many units of 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 1-bedroom apartments. He communicated to me there's 12 1-bedroom units, 36 2-bedroom units, and 36 3-bedroom units. My mother lived in several low-income housings in Santa Rosa. And from my experience relating to her over a long time, I know that I'm going to put a coin in there, a term, stacking. Because of the cost and the economic reasons, a lot of people, they'll be in like a 3-bedroom, there might be 4 adults. That's 4 cars. It would include like grandparents, uncles, aunts, teenage drivers, and what about visitors? So 168 parking spaces, that only includes mother and dad in 84 units. That means that our little streets that are already crowded with parking are going to have to supply parking for all these people. Now it's probable that, you know, some of the units may only have 2 adults, but I think that's an unreasonable idea. I just don't think that's going to work. Low-income housing, we do have some here, quite a bit, and then to have the traffic just turning right and going down Nelson and Virginia and Robinson and tunneling around through this side of town, it's definitely a problem. I'm just going to say that I think that the amount of adults that could be and wouldn't be policed or controlled could be, you know, way in advance, you know, probably 3 or 4 times what they're saying it's going to be. And
Chris,
I know that.
Sorry, that's 2 minutes. If you could wrap up.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie, and Seth.
Thank you.
So last, it looks like we have, yep. All right, you're live.
Okay, hi. I'm Tamaki Myers. I live on Washington, and my property abuts this land on the north side. And I have 3 main concerns I wanted to bring up. And I have to say I agree with so much of what has been said so far. I have a couple of large trees that I'm very concerned about that are on the property line. And one of my concerns is that no one from Pacific West Group ever came and measured the trees. They're represented as 20 inches on their drawings, but they're actually larger. And I just think, beside the fact that that affects how close they can build a retaining wall, it just makes me wonder about the accuracy of other things and the integrity of this group, that they would misrepresent something like that. Hopefully the city arborist will come on board and help clarify that matter. My second concern, as I think Chuck mentioned before, was the traffic issue. I have 2 young kids. I know there's at least a dozen kids in the elementary to high school age who live on Washington, and there's a school right there. And I'm really concerned about just safety issues of all the traffic that's going to be diverted on our road. And thirdly, I feel like the character of this neighborhood is not appropriate for such a large complex. I mean, one of the things that attracted me to this area when I moved here 4 years ago was the friendly neighborhoody feel, the small town feel. And I really think that there should be opportunities in the future for something smaller scale that just fits the character of this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ted, that looks like that's it for additional new public comment.
All right.
And I
Okay.
do want to clarify, because this is not a public hearing, it's a preliminary review, so this is public comment, not testimony,
Okay.
for the record.
All right. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the public comments. So I think we had a presentation from our applicant at our last meeting. We had some staking done. Do any board members have, we have representatives of the applicant here. Do any board members have any questions for the applicant after you've had a chance to look at staking and do a little more research on this?
Right, and through the board, I do want to note that the applicant does have their engineers on board today.
Okay.
I think the applicant did raise your hand as well. I'm not sure you want to allocate any time.
Yeah, if the applicant would like to bring some additional information, that would be very welcome at this point.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to let the board know that we do have some time constraints with some of the engineers on the call. So our civil engineer is Dennis Dalby. He'll be available until about 4:30. But the geotechnical engineer, Eric Chase, and his colleague, Ryan Paget, are on until 4 o'clock. So if you have any specific concerns or comments that they would need to address, please keep that in mind.
And if I could just quickly piggyback on, we also have our project arborist, John Zerb, available. And I do think, since there were a number of questions from the board about the soldier piling technique for the retaining walls, and our geotech does have time constraints, so it may be prudent for the board to hear from the geotech on that technique and its impacts, and any questions for Mr. Dalby before their time is up. Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right. Board members, questions of the applicant? Would we'd like a description of the soldier piling technique? Yeah, if we could hear just kind of how that works, what kind of excavation is required, is there over excavating that needs to happen? That would be great.
Okay, this is Eric Chase with RGH Consultants, the principal geotechnical engineer at RGH, and Ryan Paget is our project manager on this project. I have some stuff to show you. Is it possible to share the screen so I can put it up on the screen so you can see it?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, was that you, Eric?
That's me, yes.
Okay, let me give you rights real quick. Okay.
All right, now let me get to this. All right, can you see the drawing on there? That's the civil drawing I think that everybody's seen before. Is that showing up on your screens?
Yes.
Okay. So the soldier pile wall is represented up here at section D up in the upper left-hand corner, so to speak, of the design. They're the northern corner. And I've created this graphic right here that shows generally how this is constructed. You can see the dashed line at the top here is the existing ground surface. And what would happen here is at this location where my cursor is right now, where it says soldier pile wall with wood lagging, is a pier hole would be drilled down and all the way to wherever the design depth would require. And that's drilled from the surface, no excavation at that point, just drilled straight down to the diameter of the hole. And then you fill with, well, you put an I-beam in there. If you go up to the plan view at the top here that I got my cursor moving around, those are I-beams. They look kind of like an H or an I, depending on how you look at them. Those get set into the pier hole, or pier holes in this case, there'd be multiple. Concrete is then poured up to about the location where it says top of pier concrete. So now if you look down in the hole, you would see the I-beam and you would see the top of the concrete, yet nothing has been excavated at that point in time. And then you start doing your excavation, and you can see where one of my engineers has thrown in phase 1 ground surface. It's just kind of schematically, you excavate down, you know, a foot, 2 foot, whatever is comfortable, and you drop the lagging. So you can see up above, this says wood lagging. It can be concrete lagging. There's different kinds, but we just use the words wood here. You slide the wood lagging in to that spot. And so now that phase one, you're retaining up there, and you don't have to cut behind the wall. You're at the where the piers are. Then you excavate from below it, and the lagging will slide down, and you feed new lagging in from the top. And you do that as you excavate all the way down. You keep sliding the lagging in, and you end up in a situation, we call it top-down construction, but you end up in a situation where you're not having to excavate behind the wall. The farthest you're impacting is basically to the back side of the drill piers. So no further excavation is required. And that's, I mean, it's, I don't know, I'm hoping the graphic kind of shows it a little bit. I was a little concerned about trying to use video technology, so we went with this. But is there any questions on that that I can answer?
Yes, I have questions.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
First of all,
Yeah.
how do you then drain that retaining wall?
You can put spacers in between the lagging to allow, if there is water, because drainage is behind a retaining wall is there as part of the design procedure, because you design for a drain condition. So you have to just allow for pressure relief. So you can put spacers between the lagging, which will allow built up pressure to come through it. You can't actually feed rock down behind the wall when you're putting the lagging in as well, to fill up a little bit of annular space back there.
Okay, I'm not really quite understanding that. You're drilling these pier holes, so those holes that you're drilling are going to have to be equal to the diameter required to support the wall. So probably 18 inches diameter at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have your steel beam. You're going to have the space. So you're going to have a hole with, and then your wide flange is going to be smaller than that. You're going to drop that all the way down. That's going to be probably, I mean, for a 9-foot wall, what are you looking at your pier depth being from the top of the new grade? 12, 15 feet?
I would say probably, yeah, probably somewhere between around that. So yeah, you're going to drill
20, 22, 24 foot long wide flange gets dropped in.
Yep, you drop the wide flange, pour the concrete around it up to the top of the pier. And now when you look down in the hole, you'll have a part of the hole with the wide flange in it. And then you start between adjacent piers with the wide flange, you excavate down, it can be a foot, 2 foot, whatever your lagging size is really. And you slide the lagging in between the flanges, and then you keep excavating below that, and the flanges, the lagging will drop down as you go.
Right, I understand that. But you're going to be starting out with like a 22 foot, 24 foot piece of steel that you're going to have to drop straight down into the hole. So we're going to have these tree canopies coming over there. So how are you going to address that issue? Because you're going to have to come across, they're going to have to be completely vertical when they drop down into the hole, right? So you need vertical clearance of at least the length of the piece of steel, if I'm understanding correctly. You're going to have to come in with a crane and lift that sucker up. He's going to have to be 22 to 24 feet above the existing unexcavated grade in order to drop it down into that hole.
Yeah, and
so I'm wondering how we're planning to address the tree canopies that are all kind of cascading over that. I mean, there's a lot of concern from the public about the trees.
Right, and that I'm not an arborist, so I can't answer that question. That is a kind of a means and methods, and as to how you would do it, but you do have to drop it down, and you do have to be able to slide it in there. Yes, this is true. There are ways of holding it lower and dropping it in.
Well, I can't imagine how you could do it because you only have an 18-inch diameter hole. It's just going to have to be a vertical drop. I mean, how else could you do it?
I don't know the size of the holes for sure. So,
Well, they're going to be at least 18 inches diameter, but you know, that's going to be kind of a design for something like this. Then we're going to have a smaller wide flange, let's say a W12, maybe a W14. And so you're going to have very little space left to put any gravel. You're talking about putting gravel in. So there's really not going to be any drainage whatsoever, except for what you can obtain by gapping the lagging boards. And I suppose since you're dropping them in one at a time, I suppose you're coming back and spacing them after you have all the boards in. That's how else would you do it?
You can put spacers in as you drop them down, or you can pull them back up and slide the spacers in. That's not that complicated to do.
Hey, Eric.
So basically, we're going to have a wall that's going to drain between the boards.
You're going to have a
Be
wall.
drainage.
You'd have a wall that will allow drainage from the boards through the boards. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the drainage is going to have to happen somehow.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Caleb Roop speaking, the applicant. We're also a general contractor. So this procedure we have done probably no less than 30 or 40 times of dropping soldier piles. We're doing a huge job right now in Burlingame, California, where the depth of this is over 25 feet, these walls are. And the condition, when you run into a condition where you have, let's say, an obstruction above the pier that's going down, you can actually bolt those together as well. So you can imagine if you had to go down 20 feet, you could go down in 2 10-foot sections or 3 6-foot sections, 7-foot sections, and you slide one in and then you bolt the beams together at the connection point and then slide it down again and bolt the top one. So hitting a tree, I guess I'm just addressing the concern of hitting a tree. There are means and methods to avoid hitting anything above you, and this condition has to be done when there's overhangs sometimes on existing structures. So it is a manageable condition.
Well, let me just add from the arborist perspective. I think I've worked on a number of projects, same thing. There might need to be some very selective pruning here and there to create that access, but it's totally doable in just the way that Caleb's describing.
Yeah, and thank you, Caleb and John. I've had them where we bolted them to put them in as well. So I know it works. It does. You have to make sure your design accounts for it, but that's not a complicated thing to do.
Can anyone answer?
Okay, I have one more question. So we're going to have to be using a ground contact pressure treat for this wall, correct? Is that a yes or a no?
I would assume we're going to be dealing with it being in contact with the ground. Yes.
Okay, I'm just wondering about the toxicity level of the pressure treated when you've got that much of it exposed going around with this retaining wall. So I'm just kind of putting that on the table because that stuff is very toxic.
Yeah,
This is Caleb again. That often depends on how you treat it, but there's means and methods and codes that we have to follow. You can't just drop arsenic treated board in the ground. So whatever those are, we can bring experts in to talk about that, but this is kind of a standard construction methodology that happens, all over the country all the time. It's to deal with these very kinds of conditions that we have here.
All right. Any other questions, Christine?
Yeah, I'd have a kind of a more general question.
Yeah.
So when we've got the phase 1 and the phase 2 of the project here, which is noted on the plans.
Mm-hmm.
So am I to presume correctly that it would be proposed that the whole project would be excavated out? So we would have phase 1 and then you would just have basically a lot behind it until phase 2 came about. I mean, this whole excavation and wall thing would happen in phase 1 and then phase one would also just include the buildings in the front? Is this a correct assumption?
We actually, this is Caleb again speaking, we actually could do it either way. The site layout has been designed to accommodate either incremental construction or complete construction. So either, we could do it either way. I think the first question would be, you know, talking to your fire department and just making sure that all the life safety issues they were satisfied with. If you can imagine, you know, from the graphic that was up on the screen previously, you know, we've set the site plan up to where you could have a fire truck turnaround through a, you know, kind of a T shape at either end of the drive aisle there, which would, in that case, not require the driveway to be built all the way around, and not require this work we're discussing now with the soldier pilings to be done. We can actually do it either way. So that flexibility does exist, but, you know, it would depend on, like I said, what fire department we want to see for, you know, whether that drive out would need to make it all the way around the site at that point. That would be what would dictate doing this work now with the first phase.
Well, if you were to phase the grading, would you then have to put a wall across somewhere that you would later abandon? Because you still have the slope going up and you have the parking presumably to remain the same when you put phase two in.
We would have to do just enough work to keep whatever the grades would be for phase one. So, you know, that might involve, you know, obviously with more room and more distance, the need for walls kind of diminishes because there wouldn't necessarily be a structure adjacent there. So we could, you know, we could do natural sloping there. Let's say 2-to-1 type sloping would be possible in that condition. But, you know, part of what the engineers will work out is those very questions. You know, we do this all the time when you phase a project. And that would just be part of the phasing plan that the city would review and approve.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members, the applicant? Harry, any questions?
Yeah, I had a question real quick on just the life expectancy of a soldier pile wall like we've seen here. Is there an expected like longevity date that this wall should maintain structurally, you know, viable?
I mean, it's a standard wall design that's been used all over, and I'm not really putting a timeline on it. I'm not sure how you would. That's not an easy question to address. It's just a standard wall construction. I imagine it'd be there for the life of the project.
Okay, a wood wall would last the life of a project.
Well, I mean, it's treated in some sense of the wood, so it will last. You know, I'm not, you know, not an expert in the wood lagging and the time frame on that, but I'm sure that there's aspects of the design that you can assess the life of it, or design the lagging for a certain lifespan.
The overall lifespan of the property is about 50 years. That's kind of just standard, you know, constructability quality that happens now. But really what happens with these assets is that after, you know, usually 30 years, you're moving into some type of renovation, rehabilitation. Obviously, you've done some capital improvements along the way. You've replaced your roof. You've often, you know, replaced your siding. You've certainly gone into the units and replaced various aspects of the units themselves. So rehabilitation kind of, you know, continues on, but generally speaking, useful life. The regulatory period, for example, is a 55-year regulatory period for the affordability covenants, to give you kind of one measure that the state uses. And that might be helpful to consider. The other thing that can be done is, you know, I think engineers would specify, you know, what's the conditions of the soil in that area. So for example, is it moist soil? Does it tend to be moist? Well, if it tends to be moist for some reason, then it might warrant concrete, you know, dividers there instead of anything wood treated, for example. You know, there's other means and methods that can be done. It just sort of depends on the condition.
Okay, thank you. I had another question for Mr. Reserve, just in general. Trees have been a big topic on the project itself, and I thought if it were possible maybe to hear just a general assessment on trees number 52, 53, 54, 56, and 57. Is there any kind of general assessment you can give us in regards to existing conditions and possible proposed construction impact?
Sure. So, I mean, those are all trees in good condition. I didn't find any significant distress, decline. I mean, they're vital trees for the most part. We are encroaching some on drip lines. And I'm sure that's going to be a topic here before we're done. But the amount of encroachment, I think, is reasonable. I've said in some of my documentation that you might have read, I'm calling it, say on the two big trees, 56 and 57, I'm calling that a moderate impact. I don't want to downplay the fact that or try to convince you there's going to be no impact, because there will be some impact, but that impact will be moderate, and moderate is very acceptable on large, healthy, vital trees. I fully expect those trees to survive and to not have a problem. I can show you examples of trees all over the county where we've impacted to that degree or greater. I can show you examples in Sebastopol where we've had that kind of impact or greater, and trees are doing just fine. I can address anything specifically, Carrie, there's a specific tree or specific condition. Happy to do that. That's just a quick overview.
That's fantastic. Just overall, just curious to hear your thoughts. 56 and 57 were, significantly, landmarks, and
right.
We're just trying to minimize any impact because it doesn't belong to the applicant. It belongs to the neighbors. So, we're just trying to understand how that soldier pile wall or retaining wall, how what impacts. No one ever knows once you start digging, but what we may expect or what you've experienced in your experience, in your career, and how this relates to the real world.
I love the soldier pile wall. I think that's the best choice there is, short of not putting a wall in at all. It really minimizes the distance from the tree to the wall. I've been fooled in the past by wall locations. They look good, but then there's, oh yeah, now we got to over excavate for drainage. Now we got to over excavate to get a guy down in there to build a form, and you end up being 2 or 3 feet closer to the tree, which is not what we're trying to do. So this kind of a wall really eliminates that impact behind the wall, keeps the wall as far away from the tree as possible. So I'm a big fan of soldier pile walls. And then I'll just say, in terms of my comments about moderate, I think it's important to just consider, what trees go through in their lives. I mean, they're not protected from the world and from impacts, from pest, disease, from lightning, from storms, from soil conditions. They are very, if they're healthy to start with, which we for the most part have very healthy trees. If they're healthy to start with, they're very, very capable of tolerating a little bit of root loss, just like they tolerate canopy and foliage loss when we go through and prune a canopy. There really is not a lot of difference. Roots regrow just like branches regrow. And I think, the critical part here is that we don't take, we don't take too much canopy when we're pruning and damage the tree, and we don't take too much root system when we're excavating and damage the tree. And I think we're in that category of, yes, there will be some impact, but the tree should respond just fine.
Great, thanks, John. And then I was just curious, just to staff, is there any, any observation, any mitigation measures during construction as well as post-construction on sort of the overall, long-term health of the trees that we're talking about here? Is
that for me?
I don't know. That was actually kind of more for city staff maybe to carry. if the city arborist would be still reviewing these trees long after the soldier pile walls are in, or maybe that's you, John, I don't know, but I'm asking.
I mean, I'm going to insist that fencing be in place, that appropriate mulch is placed, prior to starting any work on the site, and that nothing gets behind those fences at any time for any reason. Those would be my criteria, and that should be checked regularly and periodically during the construction process to be sure that it's in place and kept in place through the duration of construction.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I agree. That's super critical. I see it all the time where that stuff just comes down and all of a sudden excavators love to park their excavators in the shade. Let me just say it that way.
Oh yeah.
And that it's super critical that I agree with Mr. Reserve on that. The city does require, and will certainly require for this project, a tree protection plan to be incorporated into construction documents. In terms of, and so that is something that, yes, we would stop work if we saw any indication that that was not being followed. And that's in our tree protection, chapter 812 of our municipal code. I would need to look at, in terms of moderate, and I think it would be helpful to perhaps have we require a tree removal permit if there are going to be permanent impacts to a tree, not just taking it out. So if you're going to prune more than a third of the crown, or if you're going to do something with construction that's going to have lasting impacts on it, we do require a tree removal permit for that, or a tree permit for that work, and that's it's stated as the tree. It's a foreseeable threat to the tree, or a situation exists where it is going to be impacted, even if not directly.
Yeah, I have a question. It's probably for staff. So we have some trees. We have some very big, landmark trees is what somebody just called them. And I think that's an appropriate term. And we have an arborist saying that there is moderate impact. So if this project moves forward and something happens to one of those landmark trees and they don't survive because of construction impact, what happens? Is it just, well, we knew there was moderate risk and we accepted it? What happens?
Yeah, and I think that's actually what we're trying to avoid, and really trying to encourage the applicant to minimize them, to get it below less than moderate, because moderate is, I can't recall the potential for significant lasting impacts to the trees. There are a couple of different venues. We can require a deposit as part of the tree protection. That if the trees don't survive for a certain amount of time afterwards, that is something the city would keep. And that's usually for trees on the project site. So in this instance, I think that the big difference is these are actually not the applicant's trees. These are an adjoining neighbor's trees. And, frankly, there's a lot of civil California tree law and property owners can sue for the value of the tree, which can run into tens of thousands of dollars. I think what we're trying to do is get the project to a point, and I look at, are there ways you can modify this drive aisle to not, bump into it so much? I do look at the encroachment on that back property line, and I question, are there ways that can be pulled further back, because money is one thing, but you still lose the resource of the tree and the privacy and the shade and what you have on your property as a property owner trying to be a good steward of environment if the tree doesn't survive.
Yeah. Thank you for that response.
Chair Luthen, if I could just add to that and ask the arborist, Mr. Meeser, to give his opinion. I think the goal of having the arborist on site monitoring the construction, requiring the fencing, is to prevent that type of damage. So the tree protection plan and John's presence would all be geared towards making sure that no damage occurs in the first place, but obviously John should speak to this, not me.
Well, yeah, of course. If that's part of my assignment, that my job would be to, keep impacts at a very minimum. And you were talking about fencing earlier. Typically, I see a lot more damage to trees when fences come down and contractors don't pay attention than from, approved grading or improved activities near the tree. So that's absolutely critical. And like Kari said, it's, fences come down quickly. So that's an issue. It's got to be in place. It's got to be monitored to keep that kind of additional impact from happening that could move, from an acceptable moderate impact into something more significant that's unnecessary. Does that answer your question or fill in the blanks there, Tina?
I think so. And again, certainly the project could be conditioned to require an arborist to be on site overseeing these critical issues. It could also be part of our tree protection plan. So again, there are multiple mechanisms to put in place, all with the goal of preventing any harm so that the situation you've articulated does not come to be. On just a slight digression, and I apologize, there were a number of questions for our civil engineer at the last hearing, and I note that it's 10:04 right now, and he has a hard stop at 4:30. So obviously it's the board's pleasure as to what order they address the issues. I just wanted to point that out since there were a number of questions, and we do have Mr. Dalby available tonight.
Okay. Thank you for that reminder. Do we have any more questions for our civil engineer?
Chair, if the board doesn't, I do have one that is sort of the junction between the trees and the retaining walls. That's a little bit of a question.
Okay.
And that is, it's from my own experience monitoring a number of construction projects. And that is, I know there's sort of rules of thumbs about how many larger roots you can cut and still have the tree be viable. So I don't know if this is for the civil or for the arborist or both. What happens if you run into, as you're excavating down, you get, I don't know, fourth, fifth board down, and you find a number of significant roots? What happens to the project at that point?
And I'll jump in there with my opinion and my experience. I mean, we prune those roots properly, and roots that are pruned properly respond just like a branch that's pruned properly. You've all seen a branch that's cut and then it resprouts all around it. A root does exactly the same thing if it's cleanly cut. So where that happens, cleanly cut, we would expect those to resprout and regenerate. And this moderate impact I'm talking about is not a permanent moderate impact. It's a temporary moderate impact, allowing those roots to regrow and respawn and regenerate themselves.
All right. Thank you.
That answer your question?
All right. Any other questions of especially our engineer before? Okay, Lars?
I just, looking back at the staff report from last time, there was a kind of overall question about the grading of the site, terracing of the site. Staff has requested on several occasions that the applicant demonstrate why terracing the site is infeasible. And so I just want to see, since we have a civil engineer here, we've seen the project go from a more dramatic grading to less, and we've heard the explanation of accessibility as to why this is a case, but I just thought we could get the engineer's input on all of that while they're here.
This is Dennis Dalby, Civil Design Consultants. Mr. Langberg, I'll try to answer your question. Terracing the site, with our latest plan, the sections that are shown right here don't really show it too well, except section A, where you can see we are terracing the site. We're terracing the site at the bocce court, and we're terracing the site at the upper building area. And so all of those retaining walls you now see in the site are now taken away from the perimeter retaining walls that are shown on the plans. So we are terracing the site. We're terracing as much as we can and still meet our objectives to meet the building code for accessible paths of travel. And we are maintaining, 5% maximum on our contiguous sidewalks around the parking for both parking comfort and for accessibility.
Okay, thank you. So I guess to me that just brings up questions again, maybe more for the architect, like so I don't do this level of architecture myself. So the requirement for this kind of housing complex is that the whole site has to be accessible to every person via 1 in 12 ramps or less. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And we do have ramps where we can find room for them. Unfortunately, when you've got sidewalks and paths of travel adjacent to parking, I mean, right, contiguous with the curb, we can't get 1 in 12 ramps in those areas. Our 1 in 12 ramps are generally all the ramps you see interior around the top lot, the bocce court, and up to that most northerly building. Yes.
That's not part of the plan, I know. So, okay, thank you, Dennis.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, who is that? I'm not sure where that
It's Chuck Hoffman. I made a comment at the beginning.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll keep it short.
Yeah, if you can make it brief.
This is very interesting to hear about how concerns about the trees. Is there a committee that considers the impact of the development on the community? I mentioned the traffic, but I'm concerned about the character of the community, given that we are being treated in an exceptionally negative way within the town, within the city.
Yeah, that is what this board. We are the design review board. We're also the tree board, and so community design and those sorts of things, that is in our purview. What's outside of our purview is things like zoning and densities and those sorts of things. So this board is sort of authorized under what's called the design review guidelines for the city, which are specific guidelines. They're the source of our authority, essentially. And you can see them online at the city's website. If you Google City Sebastopol Design Review Guidelines, you can download a copy of them, and you'll hear us making comments specifically related to those. And if you look at the staff report keys in on those items, because that's really kind of where our purview and our authority lives, is in design. Hopefully that helps. All right, any other questions of our applicant?
Yeah, I might have a couple. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christine.
I have a question for Mr. Dolby. I'm back on the drainage behind the retaining walls. So we have retaining walls going up to 9 feet. How do you see this drainage working behind these retaining walls? Where will the drainage go? How will they drain and where will it go?
If drainage goes through the wall, it will drain to the parking lot, which will then drain to bioretention beds where it will be cleaned and it will be captured.
Yeah.
So where exactly are these bioretention beds?
The bioretention beds are, whoever's got control there. There you go. Thank you. So there's bioretention beds right near in the planter islands, right where the lower D is on section DD.
Lower D, section DD, let's see, B, C, D.
Right, so you, yep. So.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Right. So you've got a little planter island right there in between the parking. There'll be bioretention there. Anywhere you see this FD, that's a field drain that drains the high flows that come into the biobeds. So, you know, we've got two right there. There you can see the drainage pattern along the compact parking spaces heading south. And as you go south and turn the corner, there's another compact space. And that little hatch pattern, the little dots you see, that's all bioretention along that property line also.
Wait, which little hatch pattern? Can
Looks like,
you get
from this screen, it looks like
shot?
little dot. It looks like dot pattern.
Not this. This is sidewalk, right?
No, it's on the perimeter of the project.
Oh, here, like here.
Yep. And then if you go up, you'll see it along the parking spaces there by 155.
Up in here.
Yes, correct.
Got it. So you're draining down and then that way.
Correct.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there we go. There's
That's
the
correct.
grade.
And there are other biobeds interior that are catching roof drainage and
Things like this
near the tot lot. Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
So if I understand correctly about this bio drainage, then there's no further drainage from that point. That just then goes down to earth.
So
it's dumped in there.
Yeah. So the Sonoma County has regulations through the regional board where we are required to capture and treat stormwater runoff for a particular size storm. It's generally considered a 2-year storm, which is about 2 inches of rainfall. So that is required to be treated and captured in these bioretention beds. So the bioretention beds will percolate and recharge groundwater, and also the field drains you see in them are to catch the higher flows, because they have to work for the 10-year storm and such per the water agency.
Okay, just so I can be totally clear here. So a certain amount of the water can go into the storm drain system, and a certain amount has to be retained on the site. Is that
correct
thinking? Okay, so you say, you know, it would have to be captured. It would have to be treated before it went into the bio retention zone, correct?
The bioretentions are all landscape based, and that is part of the treatment. So
that's considered treatment.
Yes, the plants.
I'm just trying to understand this. So you can take the water, the runoff water, and the retaining wall runoff, whatever you have, and you can just divert it directly into the bioretention bed, and that would be considered your treated bioretention.
Correct.
Is that correct thinking? Okay, yes. And then that would be expected to just basically, in those little beds there, take that water back down into the aquifer system, or down into the water table.
Correct. Yeah, the real reason that we are providing volume capture is so that we limit the amount of runoff leaving the site through the storm drain pipes.
Well, also you want to be able to recharge the aquifer, correct?
Well, that's the bonus that comes with it. It's more about the effect of downstream outlets into creeks and to rivers where degradation occurs, and that's the intent of the SWLID program.
Well, it's an interesting proposition here, because right now, I mean, basically what's happening in Sonoma County right now, if you ask any well driller, is our water table is dropping. And it's a serious problem. And we're taking a site here, which is taking all of the water now currently back into the water table by capturing it in all that land that's there. And we're removing the capacity for it to be recaptured and sending it into the storm drain system, which is basically running out to the ocean. So I'm just curious about these bioretentions, if that is their intent, is to try to mitigate this in some way.
That's not my understanding. It's about erosion, and it's about downstream waters that are prone to sediment, i.e. the laguna. It's a additional benefit that the volume capture recharges the aquifer.
Okay, thanks for the information. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Oh, and by the way, as part of this submittal, we did a preliminary stormwater mitigation plan that you all should have gotten your package. And that if you read through that, it kind of explains a little more detail what the SWLID requirement of the state water board is.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
I did have some questions.
Yeah, Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing, I got about 3 questions here. Some of it really has nothing to do with engineering, what we're talking about at the current stage. But one thing I do know from where I live, and Ted, you probably do too. We live about, what would you say, a quarter mile from there, Ted?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Something like that, okay. Now, originally this part of town was called Calder Springs. And what I don't think you're taking into account that Sebastopol is full of springs all over, especially on the hill area like that. The water table in my backyard is in the winter is about 3 or 4 feet. I have a pump. I have several pumps in here to move that water out of here. But originally, when I bought this house, water was flowing through the walls and through the basement and out into the street. So springs, I really think the real problem on a hillside location that are springs, which run long after the rainy season. And Calder Creek that goes through the park has water running through it almost year round. And that's coming from springs. That's not coming from runoff. So I think the problem here are more springs than runoff. So that's one thing to address. Is anybody, I have a couple other questions. You want to, anybody think anything about that?
If the geotechs are still around, I think that's that would be part of the geotechnical investigation, is determining groundwater through borings.
That's not much of an answer.
This is Ryan Padgett.
What are you looking for?
So we did our test pits in May, and we didn't see any water in our pits.
When did you do that?
That was in May. Let me see. We did a supplemental investigation. I'll have to pull that up. But I don't believe that we had much water in our borings or the test pits. But I'm going to pull up a boring log here real quick and check.
Okay. All I'm doing is comparing it to very close to here in this very similar situation. Sebastopol has a very high water table overall. It's kind of a city secret, but we're in pretty good shape water-wise. So anybody that knows anything about it will agree.
While he's looking that up, Ron, what else do you have?
The other thing was, one thing that we brought up the last meeting, which bothers me, I think, is the fact that over 50% of this is saved for farm workers. And to me, that means somebody not from Sebastopol would be coming here. I'm absolutely not against farm workers. I came from an Amish farm in the Midwest. But I think this project would be much more welcome if this was allocated to Sebastopol or West County people, no matter what they did. I don't know if you can change that. I have a feeling it has to do with financial allocation. You're getting more money for that, which is fine. But I really would prefer this to be for Sebastopol or West County first, as opposed to somebody from Healdsburg or Petaluma. The other question here is the state or the city or the county, I guess, I don't know if this is, Bodega at that point is county or state, but what are we going to do to accommodate? Is there any plan whatsoever to accommodate the increase in traffic? I have a feeling there is not, maybe beside the stoplight. On the meeting last night, some guy was putting bike lanes on Bodega Highway, which would even make it even worse. So those are my questions.
Our traffic engineer, Janice Spooler, I think is joining us at 4:30, if I remember correctly. And she is the person best equipped to respond to that question.
Okay.
I believe Janice is actually already on. I think she was able to join a little early. I might just give her a minute.
Hi, this is Janice Spooler from TJKM. I didn't quite capture the entire question about, I heard the reference between farm workers, but do you mind repeating the traffic related question?
I'm wondering, are there any plans, any thoughts to accommodating whatever number of cars will be thrown on Bodega Avenue? Is the state, the county, or the city going to do anything besides possibly putting a stoplight there, which would only benefit, frankly, the residents getting in and out of that community? Would have nothing to do with people trying to drive on Bodega Avenue. I have a feeling there is none.
Is your well, our study just reviewed the need for a stop warrant or a signal warrant. That would be something that the city would have in their future plans to conclude. There are some traffic calming measures if that is one of the concerns, but I mean,
yeah, Ron, maybe perhaps I can address this a little bit. We do have in our general plan analysis and a number of improvements along Bodega. They are generally related to not necessarily expanding the roadway, which is, as you probably know, not really a feasible thing. But there are a number of things that will help the flow, as well as look at pedestrian and bicycle safety along the roadway. So the hawk, the flashlight beacons and the crosswalks. I will say, so this is a city road from Main Street to our western city border. So this part of Bodega is a city road. We are looking at doing both a sidewalk gap closure. So as you may know, there are some places along Bodega where there aren't sidewalks, like over by the Huntley Square project and a couple other places. I believe we do have some additional sidewalk widening that would be required for this project as it's rebuilt, and flattening of it to make sure that it meets ADA requirements. The city does have plans for bicycle lanes along this. Frankly, a lot of so there's two things. One is there's the sort of overall amount of traffic on the roadway, and frankly, there have been a couple of studies done, and most of it is actually passed through traffic. So it's not generated within the city. It's between Bodega Bay and Santa Rosa, say. We have experienced an uptick in the drive-through traffic. Working with the county to look at, are there alternatives? People driving right down through downtown Sebastopol when all they're doing is getting from A to B. Are there alternative routes that we can look at for that? Is one of the things that's in our general plan. Obviously, that requires cooperation from the county. And we are tracking their with the local coastal plan for Bodega Bay, where they recognize themselves that there's been a 100% increase in Bodega highway traffic since 2007 to 2017. Our general plan is more updated than that, and it did not. The intersections themselves do meet the requirements, other than looking at specific intersection improvements. One of the things, and I did talk with Steve from W-Trans, who lives in town and was at the meeting at our last meeting. And he did request that we get a little bit more analysis from this particular project, because right now it's proposed with an entry and exit on the west side. Ted, I don't know if you can point to that.
Yeah.
That is right now, it conflicts with an existing median, and it's very close to the intersection, and that isn't something that is likely to be allowed. There is how you do a left turn out of that, you're going to run into a median, and so that was something that we will be having the applicant look at. So that left turns will generally need to be, I would imagine, from the eastern side at Robinson Road entry. He also did ask for some additional analysis on impacts on Nelson, because if you're coming right out of that and you can't go left, then there are concerns about the capacity, the impacts onto Nelson as well, which as most of you know, don't have a lot of sidewalks. There are a number of gaps through that.
Could I comment on that? Yeah, Carrie, the two things I heard from you there basically was that you're considering widening sidewalks and putting in bike lanes. Now, there's only so much space there. How does any of that improve traffic? And that's what we're talking about here. Everybody is concerned about traffic, not bike lanes or widening the sidewalk. It hasn't even come up. So that's what I'm hearing here. And common sense tells me that's not improving the traffic at all. If anything, it's making it worse. There's not enough room for all that. I don't have to be an engineer to know that.
Sure, that doesn't improve the flow in itself. Thank you for that picture. However, I think looking at alternative routes and for those who are coming from outside of the city and aren't actually coming to Sebastopol, we have a huge number of pass-through trips, and that's a solution that needs to be looked at with the county. I know Henry Micus, our engineering manager, has talked with them about are there way, if people are just trying to get to 116 or they're trying to get to Santa Rosa, they don't necessarily have to come right through straight in on the Bodega Avenue. There are other routes, and can we distribute that traffic better so that we can, because the large number of trips are passed through only and they're not actually coming to town. And it's not a road widening effort because there is no road, there is no area to widen. A lot of the sidewalks is actually going to be on the project side, or where there's the lanes are a little bit wider than they need to be. But so the real solution is, can we find alternative routes for people who aren't coming into downtown? I believe Pleasant Hill is a potential area where the county and the city have looked at in the past, or are potentially going to look at in the future. Guerneville, obviously, on the north side of town, is another one of those where, it's people aren't coming into town. If they're coming into town to get to Santa Rosa, can we encourage them through signage or improvements to those roadways? I don't think anyone coming through wants to get stuck in traffic either. So can you make the alternatives easier?
Barry, you're talking about alternatives here, but that's what the neighbors were talking about as far as people coming off Bodega and going through their neighborhood to avoid this. So alternatives is exactly what the homeowners there were talking about. They realize that people are looking for alternatives, and we all have, because Bodega and 116 are jammed, so they go through the neighborhoods. And so I don't see that as a solution at all. That makes it worse. I don't think.
Yeah, and Ron, I'm talking about if you're in Bodega Bay.
More regional.
I'm talking about the longer range. Yeah, thank you. There's the picture that it's.
Yeah, so people that are passing through, is there basically a bypass? And that's been a topic of conversation since I moved here almost 30 years ago.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen, I hate to say.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and I guess that brings up another question. What is this board's authority related to traffic?
So there are a couple of things. One is this project is subject to CEQA, but the way CEQA analyzes, so first of all, the density for this project is in our general plan. It was it is in our zone. It is zoned for this number of units, and so those thresholds for the sort of big picture traffic have been analyzed, and the city has accepted that those, yes, traffic will be a consequence of additional development. What we're looking at for this, so the larger scale trips have already in that way been accounted for and recognized. CEQA is a disclosure document to understand what the impacts are. And one of the things that, so we're looking at this particular site. So when we looked at these sites at the high level of the general plan, it was you know, the eastern site, the rectangular site, is actually in our housing element as a potential housing site for higher density housing. This whole corridor is zoned for higher density housing. It was recognized for, I think, about 40 units. So about half of what are actually being placed on this and the adjacent site. And so we are wanting to look at the particular impacts of this particular project in that way and understand those better and look at what can be done to make sure that these intersections still continue to function. People can get in and out. And I know that's a concern for the Bear Terrace folks, as well as obviously this development. You know, they don't want their residents stuck in. And the overall neighborhood. And so that's one where, yeah, it is tricky to look at that, especially the western entry exit point, if it can only be an, you know, exit right turn or an enter from the right.
Right. Okay. All right. Back to questions of our applicant, especially the portions of the applicant team that has time constraints. Any other questions?
Oh, I never got an answer on 2 of my questions yet.
Oh yeah, so we were backing up.
Ron, this is Caleb Roop speaking of the applicant. I'll take your farm worker question. That was one of them. And the couple things just to realize. So right now, the financing that we have would restrict 47 of the 84 units to just a person in a household that would be a farm worker. And again, you know, farm workers have a pretty broad definition. So the most common farm worker in the Sonoma County area tends to be someone that works in the vineyards or the wine industry in some way, shape, or form. And so that's the common type of resident we would see there. And, you know, keeping in mind, I think farm workers, generally speaking, you know, they want to live in towns. They don't want to live on the farm no more than a nurse wants to live in a hospital or a teacher in a school. And so, you know, they want to live where there's grocery stores and schools for their kids and everything else. And it's often common for them to have 2 jobs as well, especially since they're lower income and it's very expensive to live in Sonoma County, as you all know. So we see certain farm workers that, you know, will have a job in the fields or you know, picking grapes or processing or packing or whatever, and then have a retail job or a restaurant job. And all those things are common in our farm worker type housing. The other thing I would just say in the context of your question about where would they live, et cetera, it's very common for local jurisdictions to have kind of the very concern that you have, which is, you know, all these, you know, new residents are going to come to town, whatever, but we also have live preferences. So the very first thing that we will do generally, and especially if the town desires this, the city desires this, is to have a preference for folks that already live in the city of Sebastopol. You know, you have farm workers that live in your city somewhere, and a lot of them are, you know, in substandard housing, or they're perhaps bunked up in a way that, you know, is overcrowded. It's very common for us to see folks, you know, come from within the community, and that kind of preference we are allowed to do. So those are kind of the ways we address that issue. It's really not like farm labor camps or seasonal housing or any of the things you might think of for just farm workers being here. It just happens to be one member of the household, you know, could be in some type of related agricultural industry. And that's where our residents are going to be. So that answers that question. I don't know what your second question was that might not have got answered, Ron. Maybe you need to restate it.
Well, actually, let me just comment on that. I do like your proposal there. As far as people at least has first choice being from Sebastopol or at least West County. I like that proposal. I would be much more inclined to vote for your project if that was the case. I hope I'm not showing any prejudice or anything else. But if you can somehow mandate that they would be Sebastopol or West County first, whether they work on a farm or not, I would work and be inclined to vote for it.
Yeah, that is something we've agreed to many times, and we would have no problem agreeing to that as a condition from whatever body would make it.
And Caleb, of the 47, does that also include retirees that were in that industry?
It does. Yeah, it could include retirees as well.
I have a real guess there are very few farm workers living within the city limits, but there may be some. My other question was water table.
Yeah, I looked at our boring logs, and we did not get free groundwater down to 30 feet in our borings. They were left open for about an hour, so that doesn't mean that it's possible water could seep in over time, but in sitting for an hour, it did not collect groundwater.
Well, in my backyard, I have a well casing, 8-inch well casing down, and it's down 6 feet. And in the winter, it's usually half full.
Yeah, that's not surprising in the Wilson Grove Formation. The water tends to flow through the soil near the surface and on top of the bedrock. And it fills that soil there pretty quickly during storm events.
Okay, I'm done for now.
Questions? All right, seeing none.
Wait, I have one more quick question. I couldn't hear you.
Go ahead.
You're kind of hard to hear right now, Ted.
That's all right.
Turn your volume up, Ted. Turn your volume up. I can't hear you.
I'll speak up a little more.
So this is for Caleb. Earlier, Caleb, you made mention about, if I wrote it down correctly, a 55-year regulatory period. What is that exactly?
That is the period of affordability that comes with the financing that is very typical for affordable housing projects. So we access federal tax credits, and the state of California, as the administrator of those federal tax credits that they allocate to projects that qualify and compete for those credits, have a minimum affordability period of 55 years. And the meaning of that is that for 55 years, we have to rent to the income level specified in the application. And at the end of 55 years, the property at that moment is free to go to market rate, unless there's some other funding condition or local condition that would restrict it to a greater degree. But that's how that works.
So what is the income qualification on this project?
The income qualification is up to 60% of the area median income. And that probably is a little too vague, but if I pulled up the current chart, which I'll do right now.
Well, that's around 48,000. So let me ask you this question. Is that like for a household? How does that work? Like if you've got two people working, each cannot make more than 24,000? I mean, how does that work?
It's based on household size. So the figure you quoted, so nice job knowing that, is right around 47,750 for a single person. And so that would be the qualifications for a single person, let's say. If you move on up to a 4-person household, so call that a 2 or a 3 bedroom perhaps, that income level is a combined for the household of 68,000 approximately. And so that's how that works. Basically, the rents are all set for each unit type based on the income level. And then when an applicant comes in, we qualify their income, all sources of income that they have. And then that determines, whether or not they're allowed to move in based on income.
So once they move in, if their income goes up and exceeds that amount, do they get evicted?
They do not. They basically cannot be evicted for an increase in income. And generally speaking, this is 100% affordable property, so there's no market rate units. But I'll give you an example. If this was, had market rate units in it, then the income level at which they could graduate to would be 140% of AMI before you would actually need to convert a market rate unit to an affordable unit based on the income going up of the person living in the low income unit. But we don't really ever see that, primarily because if someone's income actually graduates that much, they will, immediately try to find their way into, a single family home, let's say, or a condo, or something like that they will choose to do. But there are no evictions for income increase associated with the property.
So let me ask you this, it's kind of a strange question, but let's say you have a 1-bedroom and somebody applies, a single person, And so they meet the 24,000 requirement and they move in to a 1-bedroom. But then 4 or 5 of their friends move in.
So it'd be more like 48,000 for that one person moving into a 1-bedroom apartment. But let's use that example and run with that. We have a lease that we of course have with them and a contract. And one of the terms in the contract, and we often provide our leases to cities if they would like to review them, specifies that they cannot have anybody move into their unit without the permission of management, and it generally has to be a household member. So for example, let's say a single person moves in there and they have a friend that they want to bring into this unit. Well, they're not part of the household, and if they were married, that'd be different, or had some type of other approval where they had a household, they're designated as a household, but they're not a household. So the income of that person moving in would then have to be studied to determine whether or not they would then be over income, and then they could not do that. So we have the ability as through professional management to monitor everybody's lease, and that kind of unauthorized move-in is an immediate term for an eviction. It's a violation of their lease, and that's what would happen.
Okay, thanks for the info.
Yep.
All right, I'll try to speak up a little louder. Anybody else? Any other questions from the board? All right. Seeing none, especially to our engineers that need to depart in 3 minutes. Thank you for your time and for responding to our questions. And then we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. And just as a reminder, we are preliminary review and design review, obviously. So I think our goal today is to come up with a set of recommendations for the applicant as they move towards a formal application, design review application in the future. So some of the things that I have on my list are, I'll just lay out my issues, and then I'd love to hear what everybody else's issues are, and then maybe we can kind of focus on segments and give targeted feedback based on kind of a group of issues. So my big issues are trees, grading, design transitions, kind of neighborhood context, pedestrian access, and walls and fences. And by walls and fences, my main concern is kind of the front retaining wall that seems to go kind of the length of the property. So those are kind of my big ticket items. Does anybody have a different list or have anything to add to that list?
I'll add in traffic and parking.
Traffic and parking, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really concerned that there's not adequate parking for the number of people that are actually going to have cars in this project, and that they will then be parking on the neighboring streets.
Right.
Okay. And then additionally, I have the issue of the total denuding of nature. I mean, we've got a completely natural site there, and we're turning the whole thing into buildings and concrete with a couple of trees placed in there. So that's a big concern that I have.
Yeah.
The transition from one thing to this other thing that's totally different.
Yeah. Okay.
So Ted, excuse me real quick, you said trees, grading, drainage, design context, neighborhood, and then the third was access, if I heard you correctly?
My thing was fences and walls, and it was specifically related to that front wall.
What was the one before that? I'm sorry, that was the one I was asking.
Oh, pedestrian access.
Pedestrian access,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Anything to add to it, Carrie, while you've...
No, I'm in on the same list as you, so thanks.
Okay. Ron, any other hot items from you?
No, I think I agree with most of what you're talking about. I've already stated mine, I think, and I don't think I could add much more than we've already talked about, really. To tell you the truth, we've been over this for hours and hours and hours. Nothing new here.
All right, Lars, how about you?
We haven't talked about the buildings at all, the architecture. As the architect,
Bah.
I know it's not that important really, but I think there's some issues to me with the character of the architecture, the buildings, and some of the actual layout of the spaces, the community building relation to public space, kind of the community within. I would like to talk about.
Let's add that to our list. Now, I don't think, I think Carrie might have dodged my question, but I'm not sure.
Ted, I can hardly hear you. Put your mic on or something.
You know what? I'm gonna unplug this and
get rid of that.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Much better.
I think Carrie might have dodged my question earlier about traffic. What is, as the design review board, we've got a traffic study, and we have comments on the traffic study. The traffic study seems to indicate that the traffic is kind of acceptable at a city code level. So I guess I'm wondering what our authority is related to traffic as the design review board. Do we have?
Right. So in terms of the additional volume, CEQA has, the California Environmental Quality Act has changed how you look at traffic to look at vehicle miles traveled and not, and as most of you may know, especially Pavilions, depending on which camp you're in, we do have a fairly high VMT, as it's called, because there are a lot of people who commute, from town into San Francisco or Santa Rosa or Petaluma, or somewhere down the end for jobs. So we do have a fairly high vehicle mile travel for any given household on average, and so the requirement is generally that any new development be a certain percentage. I believe it's 15% underneath that. There are certain projects that are exempt from that review. Generally, it's not every single project, but generally, and that includes affordable housing projects. So in terms of the volume of traffic, in terms of an environmental consideration that this board can consider, it's the overall is limited. That said, the action, the specific area, so the block and the adjacent block impacts are something that we will be looking at, and I think there's some continued and additional analysis that needs to be resolved for the project that is under the purview of this board through the CEQA. So you're doing design review, but because you're the decision-making body, you'll also be looking at the CEQA review. And so the impacts from that and the design of that and how we can try to make it work so that the local area is not impacted negatively are under the purview of this board. And as I noted, Steve Weinberger from W-Trans did make comments. I believe he discussed those at the last meeting about the turn lane. Our engineer had some additional comments about the slope of the driveway at the Robinson Avenue entry. And then Steve had asked for some additional analysis for the turning movements with the revised driveway and looking at Nelson as well.
Okay.
All right. Can I make a comment about design? Would you mind?
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of think I look at this a little differently, maybe, probably because of my background with Bucky years ago. I think it's been a long time ago, and I think Bucky had a term for this. I think he referred to it as synergy. And I think synergy, as I remember, maybe I'm wrong in that, it's been so long, but how this particular project affects the whole. And I think to me, that's what design is about. Maybe not the design review board, but I think we're supposed to look at more than just pretty buildings. If we're just looking at pretty buildings, I'm probably in the wrong area. So that's my feeling. We haven't even talked about the buildings like Lars said, because it's the minor part of the whole. If we approve this project or start liking it, then we will go to the buildings and see if they're pretty or not. But I think design is much larger. There is no pure definition of what design means, except maybe in the design review board. I don't know. But this project will affect, not only during construction, but for years to come, will affect the entire city. And I think that's what we should be looking at, not necessarily whether it's pretty or not. That's my comment.
Yeah, well, I think I do agree that for me anyway, I think the site issues are the most significant. But I think we can also do both. I think we can review the buildings and review the site issues and talk about the traffic and all that sort of stuff at the same time. So why don't we start with site issues, and why don't we start specifically site issues, grading, retaining, that sort of thing. I did this just because I was having trouble. These engineers that do different scales, horizontal and vertical, drive me crazy, but I couldn't get it to fit on the sheet. So I stretched it out a little bit. So it's now 2-to-1. So the scale is half vertical what it is horizontal. So, but then, you know, one of the things that really stuck with me is, 11,000 yards of dirt leaving this. And to give me a personal reference, I took a little 6-foot guy and I stuck him in the cut, and then I highlighted the cut so we could see what was happening front to back of this site. And it really struck me when I was out there when we were looking at the staking, standing, there's this ridge that runs down the property, kind of right down here. Mm-hmm. And I was standing on that ridge right above where this 9-foot wall was going to be, and basically probably a 10 or 11-foot cut is going to happen. And I really realized that where I was standing, that cross section looked like that, and I was standing up here, and I thought, okay, well, the grade is actually 9-10 feet below my feet right now. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a big deal. Side to side, that ridge is gone. It's just completely going away. So we're taking a site that looks like this from left to right, and we're flattening it out, and then we're sloping it back, is what we're doing. With a couple little terraces, a 2-foot terrace here and a 5-foot terrace there. And I get the ADA access issue, but part of that stems from the design, which packs a lot onto a piece of property. So I feel like we've got sort of the tail wagging the dog, saying, well, we can't do it because we don't have room on the site. Well, you don't have room on the site because you pack so much stuff on the site. And now the only way to make it happen is to off-haul, 500 truckloads, 600 truckloads of stuff.
Chair Luthen, if I may, the traffic associated with that off-haul is also something that is under this board's purview through CEQA, but it is something that staff have already talked to the applicant about in terms of our concerns. Yeah. Since there's no way of loading, you're going to be making a really tight turn. Right, and my 500 to 600 trucks, that's if you can get a big truck in there. If you can only get a little truck in there, you're talking about 1,000 truckloads leaving this site.
The average truck is 10 yards, by the way.
Yeah, small truck. Yeah, my calculation was based on a 20+ yard truck.
That'd be even worse.
Well, you won't be able to get that in here.
No, it'd be 10 yard truck.
Yeah. And so when I look at things like design review guideline that says grading should be minimized to the extent feasible to reflect existing topography and protect significant site features, including trees. We're not doing any of that. We're eliminating the topography as much as possible, getting rid of site features and getting rid of all of the trees and also in possibly potentially endangering neighbor trees. So not only are we kind of removing almost all the trees from our site, we're also putting our neighbors' trees at a moderate level of risk. You know, when designing a grading plan, balancing the cut and fill is encouraged when it does not result in further adverse effects to the natural topography. Terracing should be considered as an alternative use. So I think my opinion on kind of site and grading is that it needs to reflect item E in our design review guidelines a little bit more than it does. And I don't know if anybody else has different feelings about that. But if we're in
I'll chime in on that, Ted. You have spoken my words exactly, and I appreciate what you did with the site and putting the guy in there. But their section A cut's a little bit deceptive, because if you move a little bit to the west on section A, you quickly have a much taller wall.
Yeah.
I mean, that section's kind of cut at the minimal. But what we're doing here is we're completely destroying the natural environment. We're just taking all of the dirt out of it, down to, I don't know what's going to be down at that level. It's just going to be hard Franciscan formation. I mean, you could not be more destructive of nature than this project in that location. And I'm very concerned about that.
And when you consider this section, you know, this section is still compressed 60%. So if you take this up 150% wider than what this drawing is, that's the extent of this thing. You know, it's being compressed horizontally, so we're not really seeing the actual impact. Same thing.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. And we've got nature there with all the effects of nature that we have right now. We have the natural soil exposed. We have the capture of the water going into the aquifer. We've got the natural trees and the wildlife, and we're taking all of that away. And because of the nature of this project, it's just becoming 100%, okay, 99% concrete asphalt buildings. It's a huge heat sink. It's large enough that it's going to have a major impact on every single house around it in the environmental sense. It's just the wrong project for the site. I mean, I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, well, after I walked the site to look at the staking, the other thing I did is I walked across the street to the Burbank project, which is also on a very sloped site. It's got significant change from front to back. But what you see there is you see buildings that are split leveled, and you actually see some, I think, a very creative approach to access. You've got 2-story buildings that are, you know, stacked units, one above the other, and they graded it so that you reach the lower buildings on ramps going down, and then there's a berm above, and there's a bridge crossing over to the upper buildings. And by today's standards, that was probably built in the 70s or 80s. By today's standards, I don't think that what they have there is probably accessible. But what they have there is someone taking a creative approach to the slope and designing something that works with the slope, rather than just, you know, flattening out the slope of that property. And we're not really seeing that. We're not seeing that here, that anybody took sort of a creative architectural approach to designing something that works with the topography.
Well, let me ask this question. This is a question for Lars, if I could just cut in for a second. Lars, could you provide accessibility on a site by using lifts? So you don't have to ramp? Yeah, like would that qualify as accessibility if you terrace, but you also provide a lift system, like an elevator little system where you can get up? Would that qualify as accessible?
Sure, elevators are accessible, but they don't go horizontally. So you can't access every part of the site that way. But yeah,
what I'm saying is if you had a terraced wall, right, and then you had an elevator instead of a ramp system to get up, you had a lift like they have at Hop Monk.
I think that would, there probably would be a way to do it, but I'm not sure if it would satisfy the whole site. Like the whole site has to be accessible. So I mean, I think to say that they haven't been creative with grading here, I don't agree with entirely, because they're trying to fit 86 units onto the site. I think they've actually come a lot further and were creative than from where they were before and made it better. But to get that many units on this property fully accessible, that maybe they can't be more creative.
And that's very possible, that maybe we've reached the limit of what's even, possible in terms of getting this many units, this many parking spaces, fire access and all that sort of stuff to work on this site. And I agree. I think that the creativity to me has been in the site work, in burying the wall above the bocce ball court and doing some of those things and some of the ramping that's going on. So I don't mean to discount that, because I actually think a tremendous amount of work has gone into getting the accessibility to work.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's maybe shoehorning too much program into not enough space.
And I'm glad you brought up Burbank Housing, because as far as I know, Burbank Housing, I think, is owned by a church, which is technically private. I think I may be wrong there. But the difference, I think, between these two projects and what they are required to do is because this is funded with federal and state tax money. Burbank Housing had nothing to do with that. And I think the problem here, in my opinion anyway, is that the requirements of what they need to do to get funding. I think that's the problem here.
Yeah. No, we're dealing with a certain formula, get a certain number of units on to make it work and make it profitable, even if they're not making billions of dollars. Still, they're trying, obviously have to make it profitable.
I have nothing against anybody making any money whatsoever. I like it. I'm a capitalist, but
no,
I think the requirements here are too severe to put on this particular lot.
I mean, I would like to just take this moment to say, like, I don't think it's the right project for this site, but I'm very impressed with the work that they've done.
Me too.
You think all the steps that go into putting this together, even just taking on affordable housing as a development idea is challenging. Finding the funding sources, finding a site, then starting to do all the engineering and the architecture and all of that. I mean, I appreciate the effort that goes into this a lot, and I have no problem with it being farm worker housing. That's a big part of our community. That's fine, and I think we need affordable housing, and it just feels like it's hard to say, it's hard to go against it, but the work to try and make this all play out in this very hilly rural site is just so challenging.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I have a lot of respect for this application. I agree that tremendous amount of work has gone into this, and I just getting this to work on this site to this point, it's I'm sure been an exceptional challenge. And I agree, we need affordable housing. I don't have any problem with the funding source, or it's none of my business anyway. But I don't have any problem with farm workers or any other people that are eligible for affordable housing. And when it comes right down to it, these properties are zoned for this. It ticks all the boxes in terms of zoning and entitlement. It just has some design issues, I think. And one of the big design issues for me is the amount of off-haul that's required to get this thing to work. And then my second issue was trees. And we've got an application here that is removing most of the trees that the tree board works to protect, the types of trees that we work to protect. It's removing most of those that are on the property, and it's endangering some of them that are not on the property. And to me, that is not really acceptable in terms of just what our mission is as a tree board. It's one thing to say, okay, we want affordable housing. This property is zoned for it. The removal of the trees on site, if they have to be removed, we're willing to accept that. But I think where it really crosses the line is where we start endangering neighboring trees that are not even on the applicant's property, even when it's moderate, a moderate risk. Trees, what is it, 56, 57, or two of those big, huge trees back on the property there, on the neighboring property right here. I mean, those are huge old trees, and I don't feel comfortable accepting a moderate level of risk to those trees. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it, but I feel like there must be something that can be done to this back wall, to this back part of this property, to where very little or no retaining is needed, and we get out of the moderate risk zone of those trees.
I think very possibly those trees, as well as some of the old oaks in Sebastopol, are what you would call old growth. And I'm pretty familiar with this, being from Armstrong. I think there's a good possibility those were not planted. I don't know what the native trees were here. I know I asked the local arborist, and she didn't really know. Of course, this was called, what was it? Not Lone Pine. What was the name of this place originally? I'm losing it here. But I have a feeling some of those old trees are referred to as old growth or native, not planted. Everything on this lot, I would say, has been planted. There's a big difference there. I'm not in great dismay about removing most of those, because they should be, but those oaks are old growth, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At least much older than I am.
Yeah. Any other comments on trees?
I'm just going to keep beating the drum here. We've got this natural environment that exists right here, and it's creating its own ecosystem. And what we're talking about by removing all of the trees is completely transforming this ecosystem into something different. And I think we need to, it's something to think about, because if you're adding, high density, I don't know how you do it on a site like this. And I know it's zoned for this, but this is an issue, to take away all of the natural sources that soak up carbon, soak up water, and to take it all away and create concrete and asphalt is a big issue. And another thing I just want to chime in here on is, everybody's like, oh, I don't mind low income housing and blah, blah, blah. That's completely irrelevant. If this project is low income, market rate, or billionaires only, I would be saying the same thing. It's the environmental impact of such a huge, offloading of dirt and dig out and destruction of trees and nature to create something that can never be. It's a completely high density urban in the middle of rural. That wasn't the best said, but I'm really concerned about it. And these other trees on the other people's property, I'm not willing to accept a moderate danger to them.
On this
They're
subject,
heritage trees.
On this subject, I did talk to my neighbor, Paul Fritz, on this. I asked him whether there's any possibility of this be rezoned in out of high density like it is now, and he basically said no, or unlikely anyway. I think this particular lot is a poor example of high density zoning. I understand why, because that whole corridor is pretty much flat, but this is, he basically said if it isn't this one, it'll be another one. Some other project which will be similar in high density also. So I think we have a zoning problem here as part of the problem. I don't know how you correct that, or maybe we can't. I don't know. Any comments?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is we went through a zoning period of time where we, for some strange reason, increased density as we moved away from downtowns.
Yeah.
Which was kind of odd. We went, okay, now what do? We do the downtown, and then we do single family homes, and then we do high density houses. What are you doing? And this is a little bit of a remnant of that, I think. And you combine that with highway corridors, and I think that's kind of how it came to be.
You know, I'm not sure about that, Ted. I think this parcel was rezoned as part of the general plan update that was just recently done.
Oh, was it? Okay.
So
I can confirm, this has actually been zone R7 for quite a while, for at least the last general plan, which was 94, I think.
Oh.
Going back, we got a question before the applicant had even submitted, just when it was for sale on that. And I can clarify, yes, you can't spot zone, you can't down zone under state law when you're talking about residential zoning, unless you're up zoning another part and not having a no net loss, but you can't down zone in particular with spot zoning, and that is illegal. So this was zoned, this corridor was zoned because it is a highway, it is a major thoroughfare, it is a place where there is transit, which will grow over time.
But Carrie, you said that when it was, the city sort of looked at that and considered half as many units on here when they were identifying this parcel.
Yeah, so for our housing element, we're required to identify sites that could accommodate housing, whether it's a vacant single family lot, which could can be identified as a housing site because it's available and appropriate for development. You need to identify the number of sites that is the same as the 8-year regional housing need number that you're allocated by the state and the regional government. And so this one in our last housing element, I don't know if it was dates back to a prior housing element, but certainly in our current housing element, it was identified. And in general, they did go through and do site analysis of what's appropriate, what's viable. The triangular lot was not included, but the rectangular one was. And normally there's a formula applied that looked at a certain percentage of not everything was expected to be developed at 100% of the maximum density, because a lot of developers don't want to do that. They want to do something, we have another site where someone wants to keep the existing house and then build around it, and they won't meet the maximum density. It still needs to meet the minimum density. But so for this site, I believe it was sort of an 80% of the density that's allowed for the rectangular site that was identified, and I think it was like 38 or 40 units.
Actually, something else I picked up from Paul, and see if you agree with this, Carrie. He said that if we were able to rezone that, the city would be liable for the difference in the value of the property, and the city would have to pay the owner the difference in order to, because the property wouldn't be worth as much on a lower zoning rate.
Well, I would need to consult an attorney on that. I'm not sure how that works, but I do know under state law, you cannot down zone. You cannot reduce the density of housing, of sites that are zoned for housing. So I think it's sort of if we can I think that's maybe a dead horse. It's not legal. We can't do it. We need to work with the site as it is. And I might suggest inviting conversation with the developer to see if there's some way of moving the project forward in the direction that the board has been talking about in terms of the issues.
Another thing I asked him, frankly, what does high density mean? And what Paul told me, according to Sebastopol or whatever, that as far as high density means somewhere between 12 per acre and the low end, and somewhere near 25 is the maximum. But he said that no developer would touch anything on the low end because they couldn't make any money on it. Is that correct?
I I'm not going to comment on that, Ron. I think people have all sorts of different motivations for doing what they're doing, and there's a lot of different economic models out there.
I know, is the 12 and the 20, is the 12 and the 25 correct?
Oh, sorry. I'm not an economist, so don't ask me that. I believe for us that is our range for the R7 zoning, which is our high density zoning, which is the R7, which is what this property is zoned for.
So that number is correct? Is that what you said?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, and I believe this, the 84 units is a few units less than what they could actually do under the regular zoning, as we discussed. And they're not asking for the density bonus of units either, which would be a greater number.
Okay, so we were, let's see, we were talking about trees. Carrie, any thoughts on trees, since you're our plant tree specialist?
Thanks, Ted. Well, yeah, we all talked about the macro being what zoning allows. We just talked about that, and it's been tough. It's a really tough position for this board, my fellow members here, to talk about what we're reviewing for the zoning allowance from what is actually written as a design review guideline. I went through the 16 pages of design review guidelines again, just to reiterate that it's hard. This isn't going to fit. And to quote you, shoehorning into not enough space is a good analogy. And the significant, I guess the overall significant impact is going to be on the trees, the ones that are really even not on site or the ones that are of value. And so, no one can predict when a tree will fail, but to increase any or impose any new, impacts on what is nature is always a risk. And everyone has to recognize that. That's the elephant in the room. So, yeah, the trees, I think the report's been really well written. I think, you're talking, John Meserve is well respected, and his report is very well, very well documented. And I expect, we're just trying to fit too much on a site. And the trees will be they're going to be at risk, put it that way. And that's going to be the indicator. So I really appreciate your studies, the level of work you put into, these exhibits that we have before us is great. I also feel that, my words before about the project itself and its orientation is clunky. And it goes right back to that northwest corner, which is actually the area that's probably most, most disputed, if you want to say that. So there's some design work to go back to, I think, in order to make certain things really work. But I mean, if we really had to look at the bigger picture, which I went to use the word macro, it's, it comes back to neighborhood context. While zoning allows it, but we got guidelines to follow, and does it really meet the neighborhood context? That's a tough one to answer as a design review board member. I mean, that's what really makes me think hard about these projects, and it's killing me, So there, I'll leave that on trees. We talked about grading and drainage. You did design context, access for pedestrians. Maybe that's where we can go back to, because we've already kind of beat our drum on the whole bigger picture.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we talk about pedestrian access? Something that struck me because I did the exact same thing here. I went back to my design review guidelines.
Yep.
Pedestrian access. In general, pedestrian circulation should take precedence over vehicular circulation. Provide pedestrian accessibility to the street and adjacent uses using with pathways, gates, pedestrian walkways, crossings, etc., and pedestrian access which is separate from driveways. And I know that was talking a lot about single-family homes, and that's what we've kind of used that for in a lot of cases. But one of the things that really struck me about this view of the property and really about the site plan is that the front door of this thing is purely vehicular. And I know that it's going to be that most of the people are going to arrive and depart in cars. But there really isn't even a sort of a symbolic gesture to the pedestrian. We've got a continuous wall that becomes a continuous fence. And there's also a designer review guideline related to that jumped out at me that said long or tall sound walls, masonry walls, or fences should be designed to minimize visual monotony.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at that, I see, from a pedestrian standpoint, I know that this is exaggerated, that this wall really isn't this tall. At least that's what the grading plan says. So if it's to be trusted, then, this is only a 4 or 5 foot wall. But still, from a pedestrian standpoint, you're walking along this wall and now you're walking along this fence and there's not a break in it. There's no gesture in the middle for signaling an entry point that is separate from a driveway. Really, the pedestrian access point is this sort of ramp that becomes a staircase over here, and it's right next to the driveway.
What makes you say that's not in the rendering? You don't think that's accurate? I mean, I understand why grading drawings are done that way to fit on a sheet, but why wouldn't this be?
Well, I guess the civil drawing tells me that wall isn't that tall.
Uh-huh.
Now, again, I'm not sure which to believe because usually the model's rendered from a civil base, but that's wall 8 right there, and wall 8 says that it's
I think it's
5 feet tall.
Kind of a stepped condition. I think there's a double wall there with a planting in between.
Oh, maybe so.
I think the rendering may not show that, but yeah, Ted, that's all to me very well said. Like, I think they brought the building up to the street, which it wasn't before, which is part of our guidelines. And I think that conceptually that works, but then it's up on this high, this high plinth, and there's no breaks in it. I think you have multifamily development that also has, front porches and walkways to the front door from the street. I used to be on the board in Katati. There's a whole mess of developments there that are like that. And so it can work even in a big development, but not when this is the grading condition. And we have a guideline that says you should access the front door from the street. And to me, I don't think that's like everyone has to do that, every unit, but it should be welcoming to the street. And this totally feels like you're encouraged to go up the back, and even like you said, you'll arrive by car, or you're going to walk up the driveway, and find the entry somewhere on the back side. And it just has no, the break, like you said, the breaks along the way would be so helpful to have some stairs, tight stairs going right up the middle or a couple places.
Yeah, and I walked through the project right downtown. I want to say it's called Petaluma Homes or something like that. I don't remember the exact.
Yeah, near the
Petaluma Avenue Homes.
Petaluma Avenue Homes.
Yeah,
and I think that's it's not at this scale, but it has a 3-story building, that size or maybe slightly bigger. But what they did in terms of transition was where they came down to the neighborhood, they broke it down and it became more, townhome-like.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of varied their scale and actually varied their unit type as they transitioned to the neighborhood. And I think it's a pretty successful project and a pretty creative site design as well.
And it has a very wide, welcoming stair right at the corner.
Right at the corner that takes you right up to kind of the central courtyard, and it's grown in really nicely too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another example. I walked through that again, revisited that after I went up to Burbank, and that I kind of walked away from that going, okay, someone took a really creative approach to a kind of a challenging site. It had a big grade change from the street. it had to interface with a single family neighborhood and do that fairly successful. And it does it pretty successfully.
Yeah.
I could comment on that. I'm glad you brought up the Petaluma Avenue homes, because that I feel like is a unique project for that site. Like somebody attempted to design around the site a little bit. This project here, I've seen this. Like I said, my son lives in this apartment complex in Newburgh, Oregon. I mean, it's just more just sort of a standard. It's not considering the site. It's just carve it out flat and put it in there. And I think that there can be creative solutions. Petaluma Avenue homes being a really great example, actually.
Yeah, and I think that this also speaks, this condition and the inability to, transition up here and needing this retaining wall, again, speaks to the elephant in the room, which is, well, it had to be there because we had to pack this much stuff onto the site. So this building had to get shoved all the way down as close to Bodega as we could possibly get it to get a 2-to-1 slope down to a reasonably sized retaining wall. So, and this edge and that edge and the retaining down this side, and it's just all around this whole project. You keep seeing that. You keep bumping into that, going, "Wow, really?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's trying. It's trying, but
it's trying hard.
It's trying. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it gets back to the idea. I mean, I wish whoever was designating this when the plan was being made about the high density, because it wasn't thought through obviously at that point. But what this applicant is doing is really what he needs to do.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work on this site.
Yeah.
If the site's too sloped, and then the impact on the neighboring properties is huge, and we must consider that.
Mm.
We've got the one guy up in the northwest corner whose house wall is 15 feet from the 9-foot retaining wall.
Yeah. Right.
15 feet.
Yeah.
So back to that comment, Christine, didn't we make an initial suggestion that we wouldn't want to see walls higher than 4 or 5?
4 feet. I said that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you make it work on this. That's why I was asking if you could do the terracing, if you could have some kind of a lift or something to get around the ADA. I just don't know. But this is the problem: is you have to look at every single property that surrounds this thing has a huge negative impact from this, because of the proximity of this grading to their buildings. I mean, I went over and looked at the Bear Meadows buildings on that side, and I said, wow, there's a big wall up high. They go out their backyard, and there's a big wall up high. And then these buildings. I mean, if you look at the design standard that talks about the, detriment to the value of the neighboring properties, I mean, here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if it could somehow tear us up, but I don't know if that's possible with the ADA standards and the other requirements and the number of units that they need to get onto, that's outside the purview. But
yeah,
this is an issue. I mean, it's like, I do appreciate their attempt. And like I said, I've seen their projects. There's one, I believe it's over on Santa Rosa Avenue on the flat lot. And it's a nice little project. It's these same buildings, right? It's the same thing. It's the same formula, but it's on the flat lot, and it works.
Yeah.
Can I ask the board a question? Because I think there, just in terms of other ideas that are possible on this site, they are eligible for density bonus, which means they're eligible for concessions. And one of those concessions can be height. And so I'm curious if, not all the buildings, but if there are select buildings that perhaps the buildings in the middle that don't face, the 2-story or 1-story adjacent homes, how would the board feel about exploring potentially 4 stories instead of 3 for some of those, where it's not visible off site, but it could, help with making the footprint eligible to be smaller by shifting some of those units. Similar to the last round, I think the applicant heard, I think they were all 3 bedrooms at the initial preliminary review, and density is number is one thing, but the amount of square feet is another. And so what they did is they reduced, they took out a number of the 3 bedrooms and made them 2 bedrooms and 1 bedroom, and that reduced a little bit as well. So I'm just looking for potential strategies for that. We permitted a 4-story hotel downtown, and affordable housing is just as important, if not more, than a hotel. I realize it's not in downtown, and it's a different context, and that's why I'm suggesting in the interior of the site where it's actually not actually visible from offsite.
And there will still be the same amount of traffic no matter how high the buildings are.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the overall site, and could you have less impact on the site?
Yeah.
Stretching from corner to corner.
Could you get the same number of units in a smaller footprint, is what you're saying, and that might free up some space to.
You bet.
Take
that's what I'm suggesting. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Ted. Much more elegant than me.
Yeah. So by doing so, we can eliminate some retaining walls, create more buffer to neighbors, maybe even create a larger setback against bodega, and do these bodega ones, do the end ones become more townhome-like or something to transition to the neighboring townhomes? That it might open up some possibilities.
Yeah, I feel like I've gone on record last meeting that this rear building, the north building, is it's just cutting right through a ridge, and losing that building entirely would free up a ton of space, because that's sort of, I think, a benchmark that finished floor height is becoming quite a very fixed point that really creates some major grading constraints, as well as all the retaining that's needed on those on that kind of northwest property line. So to go taller definitely means a smaller footprint, and that's what real density is. Even though, again, we're sort of right on this cusp of what's considered a rural quasi-urban environment.
Yeah. Well, and something else that, as I was walking up there the other day, and I can bring a photo of this up, just put this up, thinking about, 3 stories. And, neighboring right here, that's a 3-story building. And that doesn't bother me. I mean, it's set back from the street a little bit more than what we're talking about, but the buildings along Bodega were 3 stories. I guess what I'm saying is, in terms of number of stories, 3 doesn't bother me, especially out along Bodega. And internal to the site, if we allowed, some of these centralized buildings, 1 or 2 of them to go 4 stories, and that eliminated 1. Yeah, I'd be for that, I think.
And Carrie, to your point, that if that back building was eliminated, the amount of off-fall would probably be significantly reduced now.
Right.
I kind of looked at it as a designer and a site designer, that all those compact stalls in that little quarter round back there, and even the 3 compact stalls that are sitting the other ones closer to the building, I'm sorry, right there, yeah, those 14-foot deep stalls, those are sort of a waste of space, especially you lose those, you can drop the whole parking segment down, right? So you don't have this weird little swoop of curve in there that actually cuts into that bank. It becomes foreshortened from that cut. So to me, you lose those 3 goofy, compact stalls right there. Yeah, and that corner becomes a lot cleaner, probably even better for fire. And then it gets off a lot of the roots of the trees that are of significant value. And I keep thinking that building right back here, it still seems twisted almost to the back of the property line versus to the parallel to the to the main buildings along Big Ave. So something's going on with the little lot top court right there that is making all that twist a little. And I think that's probably the 5% ADA accessibility that Civil's worked out that puts everything where it wants to be. But that's only sort of a bit of a guess, I think, for me. But thanks for doing that, Ted, because that helps a little, but still it's, wow, you know, it's tis for tat, but it helps a little. To remove that rear building entirely would be a game changer, I think.
Actually, can I say another thought here? Ted, you had a photograph of, I guess you call that Bear Meadow, whatever that apartment complex is. Of the three-story houses, as I remember, I know somebody there. I think most of the first story are garages. So they're not really living spaces. Now, if we went to a 4-story or even a 3-story next door, what is the possibility of making parking underneath the houses themselves? That would eliminate a lot of just parking spaces, and they could park underneath the structure itself. Similar, maybe not a garage, but open parking underneath the building itself. That would free up a hell of a lot of space. Is that a possibility?
If you go up in the housing in the buildings, you got to put the unit somewhere.
Yeah, you'd give up a unit for a garage, or a part of a unit for a garage.
But if you went 4 stories compared to 2 or 3, you'd gain there.
Yeah.
I think Ron makes an interesting suggestion here.
Yeah.
If we move some of that hardscape away so that we could have some more green, and took that parking underneath the buildings and possibly increase the height of the building. So the 3-story buildings are 4-story, but the parking moves underneath.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that, I agree with Carrie. I think eliminating that back building is a game changer. But where do you replace those units?
Yeah. Is it cost effective or such? Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, can those units be replaced elsewhere? I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. Can they be added to a 4-story building?
Right.
Or if they're going to be doing all this grading in the front, do you subterranean the parking a little bit? Like that building that Chris Pellicini did,
right?
Across from the old Starbucks, he's subterranean the parking.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. You kind of go for one bigger terrace across the middle. You have some centralized lift-based, elevator-based or something access point to get you up to the, podium level or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
You might be at bedrock there. Sorry.
That's what dynamite's for.
So are we all in agreement that we would be open to seeing a 4-story building kind of central to the site if that allowed us to get some more space, buffer space around this thing?
Well, I certainly would like to see that. If we could get more of the property that's not covered with buildings and asphalt and concrete, right? Mm-hmm. We moved away from that back area more so that we don't have such a big impact on those trees. And in the northwest corner, there's those 2 houses that are essentially right on the property line. I mean, that's a huge negative impact to those people. And if they could get more space out the back, I could see that. And I think, we could move some of the parking underneath the buildings. I think that's a good idea worth exploring.
Yeah, I mean, if that allowed a larger floor plate and that allowed, more units on a floor.
I think it also.
But this kind of like play area and bocce court, that could, I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas, but that could be in the back. That could be part of the green space back there. If it had some kind of a green zone to it.
Yeah.
In the back.
That's what I was going to say.
That's actually kind of what I was thinking a little bit.
Yeah.
Because there's this neighborhood context, it's been treated as a park. It feels like a park. It's been abandoned, which makes it feel like a park. And yeah, it's, I think it helps. Every bit helps. It's just lessening this footprint
So you could have like a stairway up from the back, from the neighbors in the back down into this, and they could all play in the park there. That'd be great.
Long curving, swooping, curvy path all the way up there, slope 5%.
You would have to pass what the ADA thing for wheelchairs to get up there, don't forget.
All of it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's another situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough problem to solve. I mean, this type of a development is a flat lot development, period.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it works, because there's just so many different, you got to have the ADA, you got to have the parking, you got I mean, we designers know that it's hard to solve these problems. It's just, and we have to consider the impact on the whole neighborhood and the environment there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it sounds like we're all in agreement that if the core of this thing becomes more dense in exchange for having more land left exposed, we're in favor of that.
Yeah.
And Chair Luthen, I don't know if you want to invite the applicant, since it's a preliminary review and can be a little bit of back and forth, to see if they have any reactions to that. I know they are obviously most familiar with the site.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anyone from the applicant team have anything to say? Are we crazy? Is this something that you've studied?
I think our architect of record is on, but he may be turning on his, oh, there I see him. Doug, do you want to step in and comment to suggestions?
Yeah, sure. We can do anything with an unlimited budget. I definitely appreciate speculative planning, and yes, we can do a central building with tuck under parking, 4-story. More than likely, we'd end up having to go with an elevator, which is about $100,000. This additional structural requirements and seismic considerations that we would have to make, by losing that back building and consolidating. It's a redesign, and for the record, the project down the road in Santa Rosa is a different footprint and prototype. So this development has a unique design. All of the unit plans, the building footprints, exterior elevations, and programmatic elements are all specific to this project. So by changing the overall program, it would be anywhere from 2 to 3 months in redesign time at this point. So I'm not saying that we can't not do it. I'm just, I want to make sure that I advocate for, a reasonable approach. And as part of that, I would, request that we get the speculation in writing from the board. And if I'm going to be designing to a specific program, and now I have 2 masters, I'm going to request that the board provide written specific instructions how to meet the performance requirements of their design package, because obviously that would be critical for us to hit it the first time and not have another continuance and additional time. Because I don't know if Caleb is still on the call, but with every package that we put together, it's another month or 2, and there are always continuation costs. And so we want to do what's right by the city, but I'm under contract to provide specific design services necessary to meet my contract with the developer. So I'll do whatever the developer requests that I do, as requested by the board.
And if I could articulate a concern, one of the reasons, one of the many reasons beyond engineering architecture for the height of these structures is you've heard a great deal from the neighboring properties that they don't want taller structures next door. They're concerned about their views, their privacy, and those types of things. So there's been significant neighborhood pushback against taller structures at this site. And the board's direction or potential direction appears to be pushing us into a direction of escalating conflict with neighbors. So one of the reasons, again, one of many reasons for these particular heights was to not incur additional neighborhood opposition because people didn't want taller structures next door.
Yeah. I think in asking the question, what we were hoping is that we just get some sort of feedback that says, you know, 4-story buildings don't work because of X, Y, Z, or we studied them and we discarded them because of this. I'm not sure that we're taking any steps to say anything prescriptive. I think we're just kind of brainstorming and wondering whether what we're brainstorming has any validity. I do understand the concern about the neighbors, but I also understand that I think probably an equal, maybe larger concern about the neighbors is the physical proximity. And a lot of their concern, I think, came from the initial application when we had buildings way out on the perimeter of the property, and they were 3 stories tall and they were 5 feet from somebody's you know, building. So I think that there's a balance to be met there between height and buffer. So you know, I don't want to speak for the neighbors specifically, and it would be interesting to know how they felt about height versus buffer, which one is more valuable to them. But I think both of those things are important to them. So.
And to that point, yes, you know, design is an iterative process. As Caleb said, this is an asset that's going to be in place for 50 to 60 to 70 years if it's done right. And you know, I can't even imagine what California is going to be like in 50 years, let alone a property of this size and financial investment, because we want to be part of the community more than anything else. And
none of us will be here.
Well, that's the point. Yeah. So we really only have one. We really only have one opportunity to do it right. And so respectfully, if that's the sort of direction and the speculation that the board wants to provide, I would just need something a little bit more concrete as a programming element that then I can meet with the client and we can all wrap our heads around these types of things. Please also note that we have done, you know, schematic review internally to know what it would look like if we tried to take the same density and put it onto the footprint. And yeah, we can make those types of changes and modifications work. It's just that nexus of feasibility for the project financially. And if it gets to the point where now we're looking at significant upgrades because of seismic considerations and lateral forces, then it's not a feasible project.
Sure.
So that's really, I just want to make sure I'm upfront with the board about that.
Sure.
Yeah. Have you done?
I'd like to make a comment about the view possibility, what she was talking about that. Now the houses in the rear of the property, the main focus of what we're talking about, are below the property line. They can't, there's quite a drop between that property line there and their house. So there's a berm there, which visually in the backyard, you really can't see much of the property or what's going on there. Yes, they will probably see the top of 4-story buildings, but as a everything is about compromises, and they would probably compromise the fact they might save their trees and there would be a green belt there as opposed to a house closer to them. But all the ones on, I guess, Nelson Way are facing the other. None of these properties are what you would call view property, even though it is on a hill. So that's my guess. I don't think, I mean, nobody's going to be happy with everything anyway. So it's a compromise.
Yeah,
to the cost issue, you know, the cost of all the grading and retaining, you know, if you save some there, maybe then it offsets some of the additional building costs.
Yeah, and just in general, Douglas, have you done affordable projects of this nature at 4 stories? Do they just work in general?
Usually we've done several podiums. We've got a project right now under construction in Santa Cruz. It's 65 units, I believe. And it's 3/1. It's a podium type structure. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of unique challenges at that site because it's a stepped podium structure, if you will. Mm-hmm. Most of the podiums that we've done, we currently have one under construction at 21st and 23rd and Nevin in Richmond, California. And that's a full 5-story over 1-story parking structure. So we're familiar with doing podium structures. My intuitive approach is if we go with a podium or something where we do tuck under parking, if it's not done right, it'll really feel urban. And I know that that's part of the transition. You know, this isn't an urban project. It's a suburban type of project, and that's why we've approached the architectural design accordingly, the scope and the massing. So that's something we'd have to come up with some sort of understanding of, like, how do you do a project that's neither urban nor suburban? And that's why I would be looking for fairly specific instructions or directions from the board to get a handle on that.
And if we took the tuck under parking out of the equation, so it's no longer a podium structure, have you done just 4-story residential structures as affordable housing? Do they work?
Yeah, we've done them. It's probably about 10% of the product line that we've done. Over 4 stories, I mean, 3 to 4 stories. When you get to 4 stories, it becomes more of a walkability issue vertically, if you will, just because of the, residents carrying their groceries up 4 stories and not having it as an elevator. But we've done it.
Okay, gotcha.
I think, Chair Luthen, just to make sure that we're clear, this is a sort of the board has articulated thoughts, but you're not necessarily providing a formal direction. I mean, first of all, please, all of the board members be assured we take your comments seriously, and we can explore certain things. We can't, guarantee that it's going to be economically, physically, or feasible, and that it's not going to engender more neighbor opposition. Because the views, to speak to board member Hari, it was not only the neighbor's view of the structure, it was the ability of the residents of this site to look into the neighbors' yards and houses. So we're happy to take all that into consideration and to take a stab at it. I just want to be clear that we can't promise that that's going to work out.
Yeah, well, and I think that's kind of the nature of preliminary review, is that we give guidance and recommendations, and that's kind of where we are in the process. So I don't think, I'm not sure we're going to be giving a lot of highly prescriptive, direction that says this needs to be a 4-story structure and it needs to be so many units, and that's not really what we're here to do. We're here to say, explore the possibility of a smaller footprint 4-story building and see if that's feasible. We might say something like that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
And one of the other things that Doug or others may be able to address is, if there are site modifications to address the board's comments about the retaining walls, the trees, the amount of impervious surface in development versus natural on the site. Because I think that, we're trying to grasp our solutions, or the board's trying to brainstorm some ideas. I don't know if your team has any response or ideas about those issues.
I think it takes obviously time to consider these things and to study them, so that we can really put our best foot forward and put our best effort into looking at them. So we don't have any substantive responses now. We've all taken copious notes, and I believe we'll have the luxury of having the ability to rewatch this hearing. We've been confused about any of these comments. So we have heard the feedback on these things. We do appreciate the feedback, and we will certainly give them, due consideration. But we would like to do that again in a measured, thoughtful way where we can really, think carefully and analyze things carefully.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Okay, I'd like to add in one more comment here.
Sure, go.
While we're talking about this. So we still have the issue of parking, and that's a big, big concern and very real concern for the neighbors.
Let's hit that.
The parking spots, there's only an average 2 parking spaces per unit, pretty much, and then you got to take out the ADA spaces. Those don't count. They're only for ADA. And so in the real world, people are going to be parking on those neighborhood streets. And that's going to be a big impact on the neighbors. I mean, I drove up those streets and they're already kind of parked out. So I'm just kind of putting that out there, because realistically, that's what's going to happen. In today's auto-driven world, 2 parking spaces per unit, but actually less than that, probably more like 1.6 when you take out the ones that are designated. That's not realistic for number of parking spaces.
And yet it's hard to imagine more parking spaces on this site.
Well, no, I know. The problem is that there's too many units. on this space to meet the other criteria, you know, just from that point of view. I mean, I understand it from the point of view of needing to have a certain number of units you make the numbers work on it, but that's an issue. And what we should all admit that we're doing, if we approve this, is we're forcing parking into the neighborhoods. Because these people they're going to have their own cars, but they're going to have friends and family and all that too. And there's nowhere to park on the street. So that Nelson Way, right off the bat, and across the street and around, we're forcing that onto the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just real.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess.
I'm just throwing that out. I have no solution for this whatsoever. I'm just throwing that out there.
And I guess the question on that is, you know, well, it meets the city's parking requirements.
Right, and I don't know.
But let me finish here. It meets the city's parking requirements, and you can get away with that. But this is what you are doing when you meet the city's parking requirements.
Right.
I mean that's the reality of the matter. My concern with this project and the design review standards is just the impact that it's having on the surrounding area, the neighbors, the area, you know, from the point of view of these different things that we've discussed. And the problem with it, I think fundamentally, is too many units on this size of a space. At the same time I said it, I totally understand why you're doing it. But that's the issue. I mean, that's where this thing fails from everything that we seem to be saying. It's just bottom line, too many units. But I understand why you need to do that. So there you have it.
And then it goes, we had a good public comment yesterday about the goals of the city longer term for less vehicular focus and more bicycle focus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, to me, if anything, it should go the other way, you know, as far as cars and parking.
Yeah, there's an
right, but the thing is, it's large. Let me just say this: if you restrict the number of parking spaces, you don't restrict the number of cars. That's the thing; they're just going to go somewhere else to park.
Christine, I know what you're saying. I just wanted to talk about the long term as well, not just this property and its cars right now. Okay. I'm not necessarily talking about the reality of the moment. I'm just wanting to point out that there are goals in the city that are related to bikes, and is this development an appropriate development because of that?
Well, right, of course, because the goal of this lot with those goals would be to have people there that could walk and bike to work and shop, and basically they live in town and work in town. I mean, that's the ideal.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's an argument to be made that it's underparked. I think there's probably an argument to be made that it's overparked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the argument is there's too many units.
There's trying to shoehorn too much program onto this piece of property, that has challenges. Yeah. And what about what are our thoughts on traffic, since we're talking about parking? So we've got these two driveways. This one at Robinson is really going to be the main one, and then the people in the know are gonna take a right out of here and, you know, either head to the West County where they work, or they're going to go, you know, Nelson Way, work their way through town and head north and that sort of thing. I can't envision this being a left in, left out. I don't think we want that.
Yeah, and this might be where, if the traffic consultant is still here, they could talk about that, what their thoughts were behind that, or if they see any other solutions. You know, I don't know if a you know, there's two buildings along Bodega, if those were separated, if there's a way to do, something in there, or if that's too close to Robinson to get a left in, left out that would allow for that.
Yeah, two left in, two
I'm
left.
I'm not sure the strategy behind putting it right at the very end where it bumps into a bollard, a median.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Janice had to exit the meeting. She has 3 kids at home. So I'll certainly take a note, and we can respond to that.
Yeah. And I'm not sure, you know, I'm not a traffic engineer, so I don't really know, but it seems like, you know, X number of cars need to come and go. I don't know that that number of cars is going to overload. Well, it is going to overload this driveway because the traffic is so stacked up on Bodega during peak hours that these people aren't going to be able to get out. So getting out just isn't going to be possible to make a left. So people are going to go out here and make a right. I don't think it matters where that driveway is. Making a left just isn't going to be possible at certain hours. At peak hours when people want to make the left. And so people are going to make the right, you know, median or no median, no matter where that driveway is.
I don't think we really even need a traffic engineer. We could use common sense, and anybody will tell you it's going to be worse.
Yeah,
I mean, come on. All the studies you do, I mean, any common person around here knows it will be worse unless there's some drastic change other than a stoplight, and that's not going to happen. They're talking about actually making them less with putting bicycle lanes on wider sidewalks. So come on, this is common sense. It has nothing to do with engineering at all.
Yeah, well, the reality is bike lanes or sidewalks or not, you've only got 2 lanes.
Yeah, you can't put 3 in there.
You can't put 3 in there. And so it kind of is what it is, and something is going to get developed here, and you know, other empty parcels are going to develop, and some, you know, underdeveloped properties are going to get replaced with more development.
I know.
Traffic pressure is going up, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm not sure that this project is really to blame or to be held accountable for increasing traffic in Sebastopol. Traffic is increasing in Sebastopol, and most of it is people that either live or, you know, live west if you're trying to go east, or live east if you're trying to go west.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's not really related to the people that are going to live here or the people that live in the residential neighborhoods around here. It's more pressure from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
There's really nothing we can do about that. This development isn't going to fix it. If this development doesn't happen, it's not going to change it.
Mm-hmm.
It's still going to be bad. This development, I mean, I read the traffic study. This development is sort of a BB in the boxcar. It's a drop in the bucket of traffic problem. It's not going to make it any worse, but according to the traffic study, it's really not going to make it significantly. I mean, it's not going to make it any better, but it's not going to make it significantly worse. So
it is going to create some interesting problems, though, just to contemplate it. You figure at the Robinson Avenue is where most of the entering and exiting is going to occur, because at the other side, you might come in on that side, but you can only make a right turn at the other one, and then you're going up Nelson Way.
Yeah,
but you start to see that you think about the traffic. We all know it very well. So you come up to that stop sign and you don't have a light there, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting to turn left. And then the next car comes, and then the next car comes, right? And then you got the people coming from the Bear Meadows. They're not too happy about this, right? Because now they have a hard enough time going out there. I'm not saying I know what to do about this, but it is, you can see it. It's coming. You can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, anybody that lives here is going to, and anybody that lives here that needs to leave during peak hours is not going out Robinson. They're going out here because you're not going to.
Well, they're gonna backlog at Robinson, or they're gonna turn right and go up Nelson.
Yeah.
And there go the neighbors again, right? Because they're gonna just start seeing all these people racing up Nelson and turning and going through town, and they've got a bad enough problem. It's interesting to contemplate. I'm not saying yay or nay to this project because of this. I'm just, you know, bringing this up. I'm more concerned about the parking and the people walking through the neighborhood and taking up the parking. If you go up Nelson, as I did it today, it's all parked out with the people that already live there.
Right. Yeah, I kind of view, as you can probably tell from my tone, I view traffic as kind of a non-issue in terms of our role here. You know, we've got the study, we've got the city's things. It kind of is what it is, and I don't think from a design standpoint there's much we can do about it. I don't know that creating a second left is going to solve it. I don't think it will. I don't think it'll have any effect at all. I think it still will be impossible to go left either from here or from Robinson. people are going to go right up Nelson. And that's just what's going to happen.
Actually, one of the things that we haven't talked about is actually Robinson, because Robinson, at least Ted, in our neighborhood, is one of the access alternative ways to get out of here. I use it all the time. You know, and Robinson is a terrible road, and then whatever that cross street is over to Jewel, I don't know what the name of that is, but that's become a major thoroughfare at this point, and that's going to increase over time. And Robinson is overloaded the way it is right now, just as escaping going through the normal way. I use it all the time.
Can I interrupt for a second? And we're at this for almost 3 hours.
Yeah.
So these kind of comments and discussion to me, it's not really helpful. I think, Ed, your comment about what we can do about the traffic is minimal. And I just would like to throw that out there so we're not just going back and forth for another hour.
I agree. I'm all for moving on.
Amen.
I totally agree.
Amen.
And then I guess that brings us down to talked about front wall, pedestrian access, architecture.
Yeah, forget about it. Let's move on.
Amen.
I'll just make one comment on that, which is that, and I think this idea of opening up more space is kind of related to my comment, which was just just thinking of the community within this place, and it's not just a series of parking spots and you walk in and you go into your house. I think to me, the entries are not very welcoming, but even more so the community room is the main entrance is focused into the parking lot as opposed to the playground and all that area. And it just seems like a missed opportunity that we talked last time. I think one of the public brought up the example of co-housing, like that, to think of this as a whole community, make that community room part of the outdoor, sort of an indoor-outdoor community gathering idea is something I'd love to see. I do like that units went on the community building, that it doesn't just have to stand alone, but the entry and the focus of it relate more to the park in that area.
Yeah, and I think Petaluma Homes is a good example of that too. The community building opens to the play yard, has big windows and doors. And it's really inviting.
Yeah, I think that's my only real.
Where is that Petaluma thing you're talking about? I'm trying to pick up where that's at.
It is on the corner of
it's Walker, if I may, it's Walker and Petaluma. So it's, if you're coming up Petaluma, there's the hospital and a couple of office buildings. It's right there, kind of behind those office buildings.
That's the ones multicolored buildings?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a really nice project, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an affordable housing site that the city
Okay, I'll go up and take a look. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's got this staircase.
Does anybody know how many units are in that site?
Can we not talk about that actually?
Okay, just curious.
All right. So I think we've covered everything that's on my list. Does anybody have anything else?
It's dinner time.
And if not, I will try to give us a recap.
Go for it.
If I can possibly do this.
Go for it.
So I'm going to start with, since we started with grading, I think we need to encourage the applicant, kind of like we did before, to look at item E in our design review guidelines. Grading should be minimized. And I think that reflects a lot of the neighborhood concerns as well about buffers, especially in that northwest corner. I really felt that when I was out there looking at the property line. I couldn't believe the property corner was really in the back of that house, at the very northeastern corner. Terracing should be considered, balancing the fill and cut. I think we're all feeling that there is just way too much off-haul. Proposed grading under the drip line of protected trees. I think we all agree that the risk level to neighboring trees, especially trees off property, needs to be significantly less than moderate. I think we need to go into this with a clear expectation that there will be no impact to neighbors' trees, especially gigantic trees that outage all of us. I think we talked about pedestrian access along the front, to again citing our design review guideline relative to, where is it? I've got it highlighted here somewhere. Fences, long and tall sound walls, masonry walls, or fences should be designed to minimize visual monotony. So doing something with that front edge and something that also provides pedestrian access that is not associated with a vehicular access point, I think is something the applicant should address and look into. Height and length of retaining wall should be minimized. I think originally we said, 4 feet is the highest reasonable retaining wall we can envision. I don't think we've really changed on that, either for the wall in the back or walls anywhere else. Traffic and parking. I don't think there's much to say on traffic. I really don't know what to say about parking.
And for the traffic, I think we have already outlined the additional traffic things to look at in terms of that westernmost
driveway
exit to the entry and exit to the site.
Yeah. Architecturally speaking, if we could get the community building to relate more to the common area, that would be good, rather than relating to the parking area. And I think that kind of goes along with some of the things in our design review guidelines, but I don't have one highlighted to make reference of. And in terms of exploration of, well, I guess maybe what we need to say is the board would be open to an increased height, an increased density at the center of the project, if that meant that we would get more space around the perimeter, protect neighbors' trees, and reduce or eliminate retaining walls. I don't know that we need to say anything more than that. Everybody in agreement with that?
Yeah.
I think that sounds great. Yeah.
Anything else to add to our summary?
Can you just take this picture off or we could just.
Which one?
So the Petaluma Homes.
Oh, am I still on Petaluma Homes?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I meant to go back to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
I think you hit all the high points.
All right. Then I think we are probably concluded here. Anybody else has something else to talk about?
No.
If not, I will thank the applicant for your cooperation in all this. The staking was super helpful, so thank you very much for doing that. Thank you for bringing your team here tonight. We appreciate the back and forth and the input, and we look forward to seeing you with a formal application here soon.
Awesome.
Thank you all very much for your time.
All right, then I think we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all at the next meeting.